About a century ago, the heavens opened and dungeons began to appear in the world. The monsters emerging from them could not be defeated with conventional weapons. The only ones who could fight them were people in whose bodies supernatural abilities awakened at the same time as the appearance of the dungeons. These people began to be called awakened. Thanks to them, the world regained stability. While monsters, mana, and a new civilization took root, some of the awakened ones became hunters whose job it was to destroy these creatures. However, decades later, after the discovery of terrifying dungeons, it became obvious that there were too many hunters. Once the secret mechanism was revealed, it became possible to artificially awaken people so anyone who had enough money for this could take advantage of it. The number of people wishing to become hunters naturally also increased, so the great era of hunters began to flourish. However, at the same time, such unforeseen changes in the order of the world led to obvious problems, so governments instituted a professional examination. Only those who passed it were allowed to become an active hunter. Of course, educational institutions appeared that prepared people for passing this exam. They provided all the necessary information and also trained students. Eventually, private institutions appeared that trained future professionals in their field. Such institutions began to be called hunter academies. Kim Seo-jun was the one who tried his best to adapt and succeed in this new world order. He is naturally awakened, and at birth he was given more power than ordinary people. However, in order to pay off the debts of his parents, who died in an accident shrouded in secrets, he has been transporting killed monsters for 9 years in a row. There is only one thing that helps him withstand such hard work, and the psychological pressure of debt. Naturally, we were talking about his youthful dream of becoming a professional hunter. Such a status would give him not just financial freedom, but also some influence. Naturally, his workmates, among whom there were no such young guys, were skeptical about his goals. When asked how he was doing with becoming a hunter, the guy calmly answered that he was looking for a good academy, but there weren't many inexpensive ones among them. The discussion between the two old men boiled down to a misunderstanding of why an awakened young man could not become a hunter simply because he had an innate talent. Of course, the fact was that attending the academy had been mandatory for becoming a hunter for 50 years. Most of the teachers at the academies are active hunters who share their experience and teach all sorts of cool tricks that you need to know before risking your life. Because of this, a huge gap has formed between the uneducated and the academy graduates. The time has come when, in order to become a hunter, you must study at the appropriate institution. Kim Seo-jun was sincerely happy about this day, because he finally waited for the moment when his account had collected a large enough amount, which would be enough for a year of study at the academy. His joy was hard to miss. He would like to go to a better establishment, but they are too expensive, so he was content with the place for which, after many years, he was able to save with such hard work. At the same moment, a recruitment advertisement for the Transcendence Academy suddenly arrived on his mobile phone. This was the first time he had heard about it, but the promo promised that we were talking about individual tasks for each student from teachers who were more than 10,000 years old. It all seemed like some kind of unfortunate joke, as well as the inserted interview of a student who was able to pass the 9th grade Swordmaster exam. Shocked by what he saw, Seo-jun could not believe something like this, and thought about what kind of crazy person created this advertisement. The Academy's website was the same as the other institutions, but the list of faculty names was more like names from history than a list of current outstanding hunters. The basics of using a staff and a spear were taught by a professor nicknamed the Great Sage. As it turned out, this sage was some kind of monkey, whose real name was Sun Wukong. For the guy watching this advertisement, it seemed that such classes looked very normal, given the concept of the teacher. However, just a moment later, Sun Wukong decided to demonstrate a deflection move, one of the basic skills of a spear master. Using a spin and grab, he struck with a sharp movement towards the mountain nearby. Seo-jun was shocked by what happened in the video because as soon as the monkey struck, the huge mountain disappeared. It seemed that this was nothing more than some kind of fake, because none of the famous hunters was capable of something like that. The guy rose to his feet screaming, saying that this was impossible even for S-class hunters. The advertisement ended and a window appeared on his phone asking if he wanted to sign up for this class. When he jokingly decided to accept the offer, it turned out that to do so he needed to create an account and pay for a subscription. He couldn't believe that they were demanding $40,000 for this, exactly the same amount he earned after many years of difficult work. Shouting that they were some kind of charlatans, the guy closed the advertising window. Returning to work, his older colleague, who noticed the good mood of the young comrade, asked whether the young man was really going to enter the Hunter Academy. As always smiling, Kim replied that we were talking about an academy called the Ark. He heard that the teachers there are quite good, although this institution is not considered advanced compared to the others. Being happy for the young man, his colleague asked not to forget about him when he became rich as a hunter. In response, the guy laughingly suggested that he deal with the captured monsters and promised that he would even get a real dragon. Having loaded his back with the remains of the destroyed monster, Kim So-jun promised that one day he would give his friend the opportunity to play football with the skulls of the rarest monsters. Someone once said that life seems like a comedy from afar, but a tragedy when you look closer. Actually, this proverb described what happened that day, because when Kim So-jun walked under the crane, the chain broke and a heavy load fell on him. To truly laugh, you need to accept your pain. Due to an accident, the young man was taken to the hospital, where doctors reported that his condition was very serious because the regeneration of the awakened only aggravated the process of restoring the body. In addition, when the boss heard about the request for compensation, he shouted that this would not happen. He feared that his reputation would be ruined if the world found out about what happened at their plant. The operation cost him $40,000, so he was left with nothing at all. He knew that he needed to be able to look far into the future, so he looked into it all the time while he endured hellish labor for 9 years. All his savings were spent on the operation, and all that was left was the $3,000 he received from Mr. Manchul. Deeply devastated, the guy wondered whether he could go through this difficult and long path again. Suddenly, a message from the same Transcendence Academy arrived on his mobile phone. It said that the past of all transcendental masters is insignificant and insignificant, so they have a special offer for new students in the form of a free pass. While in the hospital, he couldn't find their website a second time, but the academy found it on its own. To his surprise, the site reported that their registration fee had been calculated taking into account his situation. Now the registration membership fee was $3,000, and that was again all he had at his disposal. The worried guy wondered if this was a scam, because the mysterious academy was actually trying to take away all his funds for the second time. With a smile on his face, the positive Seo-jun decided to try his luck despite the difficult situation. He was not afraid of losing money, because there was nothing in his bank account. But as soon as he signed the cash contribution, the bills from the envelope began to fly out the window. After that, he saw congratulations on his admission to the Transcendence Academy, and strange magic was released in front of him, and an unusual creature appeared. A small man came out of his phone and asked if the guy in front of him was the one who had become a new student at their academy. Seo-jun was shocked when he heard that this creature was his mentor, who was in charge of primary education at their academy. A strange kid with mysterious magic who continued to stand on the phone said that his name was Mentor. Confused, Seo-jun could not understand what was happening. The little creature again joyfully said that it was the mentor of their new student. Trying to dilute the tense situation with an absurd joke, Kim So-jun suggested that in front of him was none other than Mentor, who was the teacher of Odysseus, the hero of Greek mythology. In response, the proud little man said that in this case, ideas were unnecessary. The mentor said that Odysseus was the first student he mentored. He even added that a long time had passed since Odysseus became a transcendental master. Proposing to get down to business, Mentor said that the Academy of Transcendence trains those who want to go beyond the boundaries of their race. Suddenly, Seo-jun cried out in panic. Did he really sign up to study at the Academy for Transcendence and not for hunters? Sighing heavily, Mentor said that he did not understand how they could be compared at all because they were on a completely different level. The confused guy began to say something about S-class hunters, but Mentor did not listen to him and, interrupting his speech, replied that their instructors were able to deal with hunters with one finger. After that, he held out the phone towards the new student and asked him to fill out the Transcendental Aptitude Test. The first question asked about an area in which he would like to succeed. This way, their academy could see exactly what kind of master he wanted to become. The test also allowed them to determine his current level and inclinations. This was necessary to give him the best recommendations, so Mentor asked him to answer as honestly as possible. So Jun chose combat as his direction. However, when he saw the second question, he was faced with difficulty in choosing an answer. The question was about his skill level, but the answers were simply insane, asking whether he could clear an entire plane or split a mountain with a blow. The mentor admitted with a laugh that many doubt this issue, so it is worth choosing something that literally reflects his abilities. After that, he cheerfully asked if Seo Jun could clear the plane with his strongest blow. As with the previous question, he answered negatively to the question of whether he could split a mountain in two with one jerk. The mentor was sincerely upset, realizing that the young man could not even pull an entire mountain out of the ground. Realizing that he was a real incompetent, Mentor mentally wondered how he even managed to register in their outstanding academy. Winking at the young man, Mentor clarified that there was nothing wrong with this. The guy really didn't have to worry, because the Transcendence Academy does not exclude its students. Once a member of this institution remains a part of it forever. After some time, Kim Seo-jun, choosing the weakest possible options, finally finished the survey. He was seriously exhausted by this test and asked his mentor why the academy asked 108 questions to academy newcomers. While Seo-jun was trying to collect his thoughts, Mentor said that he would like to recommend some mandatory lectures for the new free pass holder. He offered to discuss this after they analyzed his profile. Based on the test results and information inside the academy base, Seo-jun's preferred method of fighting is using a spear. After thinking a little, Mentor said that to wield a spear instead of cultivating mana, it would be better to choose the Eastern Kai technique. The great celestial sage was best suited to learn the basics, but considering that the clumsy guy couldn't even lift a mountain, Mentor decided that it would be too difficult for him. In addition, he noticed that in addition to wounds, Seo-jun also has mental problems, which worsen his performance. Jumping onto the student's shoulder, the academy representative invited him to start with a lecture by instructor Siddhartha Gautama. Hearing this name, Seo-jun shouted in shock whether he was talking about the Buddha himself. The mentor replied that this was true, and although the instructor denies such a title, all students address him this way. Thanks to his lectures on psychology, he is one of the most famous instructors. His subject is required for the Transcendence exam. Usually, attending this lecture requires a huge amount of money, but Siddhartha Gautama is so insistent on saving poor souls that Kim Seo-jun received permission to study his teachings for free. The Academy's website said that upon completion of the lesson, he would receive an unshakable heart, an SSS-Rank skill. The mentor clarified that this is the reason why the instructor's lecture is considered necessary. An unwavering heart will help a guy succeed in almost any direction of transcendence. Winking positively, Mentor said that even if the young man thought he was going crazy, he should definitely watch the lecture to the end. Disappearing without answering all the questions, Mentor finally said that he would contact the student after he analyzed his profile in detail. The confused guy was left alone again. He realized that having lost all his money, he had no other option but to look at what he paid for. The instructor's first words were a question to the student about whether their world really exists. Seeing him for the first time, Seo-jun was surprised, realizing that this man really looked like a living golden statue of Buddha. Buddha himself answered his own question by saying that the word I did not exist, therefore he himself does not exist. The lecture turned out to be really difficult, because comparisons and reflections on existence on the part of the instructor were at the level of some kind of deep philosophy. Remembering the words of the mentor, Kim Seo-jun, continuing to study the lecture, only became convinced that the instructor's words could plunge him into shock and drive him crazy. After a few minutes of listening to this teaching, he was so exhausted that he could not continue. The lecture was less than 0.1% complete, and yet he had a lot of free time, so throughout the week the guy still studied the doctrine. The result was simply amazing. The doctor was confused when he saw the amazing speed of the young man's recovery. In his 30 years as a doctor, this was the first time he had seen something like this, even though he constantly worked with the awakened. During this time, Kim Seo-jun recovered significantly and became convinced that, thanks to the lesson of Siddhartha Gautama, his heart knew peace. which increased the speed of recovery of his body. Every time he listened to the lecture, it seemed as if his mind was leaving him. However, even though the lesson was only 1.5% complete, the effect was truly amazing. Reviewing the research results, the doctor hesitantly said that you never know what can happen, so Seo-jun will be in the hospital for at least another week. Seo-jun didn't mind. He just wondered what would happen when he finished listening to the lecture. He accepted the doctor's offer with a smile, thinking that the Transcendence Academy was not some kind of joke, as he had previously believed. Now he could move his body and thought about watching Chiron's lecture at the same time. The reward for studying this lecture was Class A Metamorphosis. Compared to Unshakable Heart, the rank of this skill was quite low, but even so, it was far from a low-level ability. Remembering Mentor's words that with an unwavering heart, most directions would become a piece of cake, he decided that that skill was simply too powerful. After turning on the video playback, Seo-jun saw the face of the instructor named Chiron. As it turns out, Chiron is a centaur, a creature with the torso of a human and the lower body of a horse. He was the teacher of almost every hero in Greek mythology, so the importance of this lecturer is incredible. First of all, the hero teacher said that the purpose of this lecture is to prepare students to the stage from which they can move to the early levels of transcendence. Relaxed Kim Seo-jun with a satisfied face thought that such a legendary person was in front of him. In the meantime, the lecturer asked to note that in this course, military techniques will be discussed superficially. When Chiron spoke about the first step to becoming transcendental, he began to hold a strangely long pause. Within a moment, he furiously shouted to the student that the bastard should quickly get up and go to train. From such a terrifying scream, Seo-jun jumped out of his seat and the phone fell out of his hands. The guy suddenly found himself on the ground, and a message appeared on his phone about a task in which he must perform a certain number of repetitions of 5 exercises. Looking thoughtfully at his phone, he wondered whether he would really have such a test literally every day. The doctor warned him that he should try not to overexert himself during the week, so he was not particularly keen on starting the exercises. Yawning lazily, he pressed the skip button to move on to the next lecture. During his stay in the hospital, he planned to simply listen to lectures. However, everything was not so simple. With a smile imposed by the situation, he learned that it was impossible to move on to lectures until he completed the assignment. No matter how he clicked on this button, the result did not change. The guy panicked and wondered how the academy even knew that he hadn't done anything on this list. He had no other choice but to start studying. Still, he had no intention of going against the doctor's advice. As soon as he went to the page with Buddha's lectures, he saw a message that the free pass to the teachings would end in 83 days. With tears in his eyes, he ran outside to begin completing his tasks. He could not waste time on rest, because the loss of knowledge due to limited time could play a bad joke on him. Initially, he was given 90 days, but only a week later he learned that there was such a framework. After all, this is an academy, and it is logical that not everything is free. Although Seo-jun did not know exactly how the academy worked, he assumed that in order to progress, he should absorb the knowledge until he understood it. Once he reached a certain level of understanding, he made no progress from listening until he realized something new. The Buddha's lecture turned out to be not so easy, so while doing Chiron's task, he doubted that he would be able to complete these free courses in just 83 days. To tell the truth, until that moment he had not seen the point in training at all, but fearing to lose this opportunity, the guy went to the training ground. For the sake of the opportunity to study at this academy, he carried monsters and killed hunters for 9 whole years. Now he couldn't afford to lose his chance to become a worthy hunter. The monsters he carried on his back weighed about 70 kilograms, so he had no need for additional exercise. Although he still does not know how to use magic, he was confident in his physical strength, since he is one of the awakened ones. Having completed all 300 push-ups in one go, the guy rose to his feet with a joyful face, and wiping sweat from his forehead, said that compared to years of grueling work, this was just a trifle. To keep up the pace, he glanced at his phone to see the next task. However, at that moment he was confused, because he saw that of these push-ups he was only credited with 81. Having difficulty repeating the exercise, he realized that only perfect push-ups counted. With a trembling body, he nevertheless completed this part of the training. The following tasks were no less difficult, including squats, abdominal exercises, and pull-ups on the horizontal bar. He was simply shocked, because it turned out that even running does not depend so much on the distance covered as on the quality of the movement itself. Towards evening, despite the people around him, he fell to the ground and shouted that he couldn't stand it any longer. And yet, the day's tasks were completed. So several days passed. The guy constantly left the hospital at a certain time and was already attracting the attention of some patients. One granny who was watching him said with surprise that the young man was getting prettier every day. He worked as hard as he could, making his grandmother feel proud of the younger generation. At that moment, they heard urgent news on TV that at 5 o'clock in the morning, a level 4 giant had been discovered in Seoul. According to the journalist, the Hunting Association claims that he was hibernating, which, as it turned out, the Monster Transport Service did not know. So the giant ended up in the center of the city, where he woke up from his sleep. Many could have died, but by pure chance, an awakened one was nearby and repelled the monster's attack. Kim Seo-jun watched this news carefully, because this incident could one day happen in the company where he worked previously. The awakened one who found himself in that place on time was a student of the Gown Academy. Jung-hyun Yoon-woo, an S-class hunter, was able to prevent the tragedy. After hearing the news, the granny said that the hunters had saved their lives again. With the words that the hunters are great people, she showed extraordinary observation, suggesting that the young man was also one of the awakened ones. Taking his hand, she suggested that he was a hunter, so he too would someday be shown on TV. The confused guy didn't even know what to answer. At that moment, a disgruntled man who was sitting nearby joined the conversation. He asked his grandmother if she really believed that the news showed just anyone. A man with a newspaper in his hand said nervously that it is very difficult to become a hunter now, because the chance is literally 1 in a million, while Kim Seo-jun stood behind him, confused and with a kind smile. The surprised granny said that everything had changed, because in her time, everything was a little different. Looking at the young man, the unpleasant man asked what he was trying to achieve. He said that if the guy is still not studying at the academy, it means that he is wasting his time training. He rudely stated that he would not become a hunter, so it was better to just give up. The stranger advised him not to waste his youth on unrealistic dreams, but Seo-jun disagreed with his words, because he could not give up the path to which he dedicated his life. Despite the stranger's arguments, Seo-jun resolutely said that he himself would decide what to do, while the man should take care of his life and not touch the dreams of others. The stranger fell silent in surprise, because he did not expect such words. And yet he jumped out of his seat and shouted that the young man turned out to be a rude man, that he did not know that he should listen to the advice of his elders. Kim Seo-jun did not intend to continue the dialogue and silently left. For him, words about an impossible dream were nothing more than the delirium of someone who had not achieved his goal. Now he could confidently think about being an academy student. In just a week, he felt the results and was confident that he could become a professional hunter. Going to the next training session, he promised himself that he would never leave the path and achieve his goal. In the evening of the same day, another event occurred when the monster ended up on the streets of Seoul. This time the incident was also avoided thanks to the work of the girl, who was a hunter using a sword. As it turned out, she had a very difficult time, but not in battle, but in her career. She was exhausted from working at her pointless academy, which had no students at all. A few days later, he finally returned home. His own bed was what he had been missing all this time. He stayed in the hospital for 2 whole weeks, so he really missed his small rented apartment. He had another year to prepare before the hunter exam. However, even admission to the exam cost money. At this moment, he had nothing at all. The next morning, he decided to check the academy's website because he was already finished with the assignment, but did not look at the progress of his lecture. He never had time to watch the lectures because the next day began after he finished his training. This time he was able to resume access to training and even received praise from his mentor. However, he was a little upset by Kiran's words that now he had learned to walk like a baby. Now he was invited to take his first steps towards the mastery of transcendence. The first step discussed was mastering your feelings. The next morning, Seo-jun returned to the construction site again. Everyone was surprised by his appearance, because they had previously heard that he needed some kind of serious operation. The boss even said that he was deprived of intelligence, since he decided to return to work for him. He warned that the guy would not get off easily if this happened again. Of course, Kim was not particularly eager to return. However, he had no other choice. In addition, he noticed that, apparently, the boss feels guilty, albeit just a little. We were talking about a situation where he refused to pay compensation because he was afraid of an outcry. Under the guise of a great thinker, during breaks between work he continued to think that all his plans rested on money. On the one hand, if he doesn't work, he won't have anything to eat. However, if he works, then he will not have time to study. His thoughts became increasingly deeper and more restless, because if he did not complete his daily task, then he would not be able to listen to Chiron's lectures, which would slow down his progress. It seemed to him that it was worth starting to review past lessons that he still had not fully mastered, especially those related to mastering his own feelings. Chiron mentioned that the 5 human senses play a key role in combat. Regardless of the feeling, we first perceive the stimulus, then we recognize it, and then we draw a conclusion. However, it was too slow. The mentor said that he would teach the student how to speed up this process as much as possible. What he meant was that Seo-jun would experience something completely different from these 5 senses, the 6th sense hidden within him. It seems that Kim So-jun has already gradually mastered this feeling, familiar to us as intuition. When his friend entered his locker room, he tried to slap him on the head with a friendly laugh and said that he was glad to see them. To their surprise, the guy was instinctively able to dodge this blow. The man and even Seo-jun himself could not believe how he managed it, because it seemed that eyes appeared on his back. At that moment, their conversation was interrupted by a disgruntled boss who shouted that they should not shirk work. When they returned to work, Ajoshi could not believe his eyes, because Kim So-jun decided to lift as much as 200 kilograms of weight at one time, even though he had only recently been in the hospital after a major operation. But the guy was fine, and with a kind smile trustingly asked to load a little more. With a heavy load on his back, he looked quite happy as usual. The guys could not believe that such a young guy was able to carry such weights on his back, even though he had only recently been in the hospital. The fact that he was so frisky let them know he was fine, but that didn't make them any less worried. Meanwhile, the break began, but Kim had no intention of stopping. He experienced some strange feeling. For the first time, he felt that strength was filling his body, despite long work. Taking advantage of the free moment, he decided to start exercising with weights on his back to complete his daily task. After doing a few squats, he wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at his phone to see if he was keeping his form right and if those reps were counting. He was indescribably shocked when he saw his own results. 1 squat was counted as 3. Seo-jun suggested that efficiency increases depending on the amount of additional weight. While the guy was trying to calculate the number of repetitions required to complete all the tasks, his friend urged him to get some rest. However, Seo-jun, delighted with his knowledge, was not going to be distracted from the process. He snatched some more cargo from Ajoshi's hands and ran towards the loading of the material. The joyful guy realized that now it doesn't matter how he works, because the system only evaluates the result. He was happy with the news that he could exercise while working. With such an incredibly heavy load on my back, even push-ups were used. The day turned out to be very productive, but the exercise combined with work left him much more exhausted than ever before. Combining work and classes turned out to be very effective, but very difficult. With a laugh, he said that he didn't even know who else would think of training and carrying parts of fallen monsters at the same time. As a result, he not only saved time on training but also earned some money. In addition, he even found time to listen to lectures that interested him. He got it done so quickly that he began to feel like he was wasting his time. Repeatedly watching lectures no longer brought him progress, so he decided to enroll in another course. Among the free lectures, he took a closer look at the lecture of Professor Xiang Yu, who was nicknamed King Hegemon because he could even lift a mountain with his own hands. Hegemonic King Xiang Yu is the legendary ruler of Western Chu, known for his superhuman strength. When it comes to fighting against numerical superiority, they say that such daredevils are like him. As soon as Seo-jun signed up for this free course, he had access to the lecture. As soon as the guy opened it, he saw Mr. Xiang Yu, who said with a laugh that since he wants to learn the skill of the spear, he is probably just a loser who doesn't even know the basics. Kim Seo-jun truly felt insignificant from such words from the great master from the past. And yet, the hegemonic king was not going to refuse him, and declared that all narrow-minded people could be free in their choice. After that, for some reason, he decided to offend the monkey known as the Great Sage of their academy, saying that there was no need to listen to him. To the guy's surprise, the mentor said that he should just wave the spear in order to feel it with every cell of his body. Before returning to learning the basics, he had to complete a daily task of 5,000 swings of the spear. Seo-jun felt depressed because he expected a lot from this lecture, but in the end, the mentor only said a couple of sentences and gave him some kind of primitive task. The next morning, he went to work again. This time, they were visited by an important lady who is in charge of this sector. The boss tried in every possible way to suck up to her, saying that there was absolutely nothing to worry about, because they had not had a single accident at work thanks to his competent management. However, B-class huntress Park Seo-yoon came with another question. She asked if the boss had heard about the giant who had awakened the other day. She witnessed his death firsthand, but would still like to do a thorough check in case they missed something. The boss continued to please her in every possible way, causing some condemnation and even laughter from his charges. When the workers started talking about who this huntress was, Seo-jun decided to eavesdrop on their conversation. As it turned out, they learned that Park So-yoon is the granddaughter of the master known as the Star Sword. Even Seo-jun had heard about the man's fame. Park Ming-chul, nicknamed the Star Sword, is a true legend. 100 years ago, he was one of the awakened ones who received their power at the moment the gate opened. Back then, practically nothing was known about the awakened ones, and the monsters were more cruel and could roam the streets unhindered. There was no complete confidence that humanity could survive. Star Sword was among those who grabbed the weapon without hesitation, mastering his new power. He was one of the few awakened people in Seoul, one of those who did not allow our civilization to disappear, the real savior of the world, a hero in the flesh. A lot of time has passed since then. He is already quite old, but he is still a heavyweight in his field, able to compete with any hunter of the highest level. Of course, Kim Seo-jun aspired to reach his level of fame. However, he was not interested in such tales now, because he was completely focused on his training. Noticing what he was doing at the worksite, So-yoon asked the boss what he was doing. The confused boss asked her not to pay attention to him, saying that he had been acting as if he had gone crazy for a week. The girl decided to pass by, believing that he was simply not right in the head, since he was exercising right on the worksite, also with such a load on his back. Min-chul was also not happy with what was happening. He was very worried about the condition of his young friend, but he still behaved strangely. When he approached the young man, he asked when he would finally calm down and have a proper attitude towards work. His productivity didn't really suffer, but it was crazy to see him straining with so much weight on his back, like it was the right thing to do. Having finished the next exercise, the guy happily said that these exercises really make sense. Min-chul didn't understand his behavior at all, because besides, Seo-jun was constantly looking at his phone with the screen off. In response to his comrade's words that he would soon be hoarded, Kim joyfully said that everything was fine and he could bring a little more cargo. This way he not only trains, but also makes the work easier for others. In fact, Min-chul was glad to see him so energetic and happy. Suspecting nothing, he did not notice how the body behind him regained consciousness. The young man's sixth sense made him understand that something was happening, so he looked around worriedly. Within a moment, a huge monster began to rise above his friend, which, having been divided into parts, gathered its body together. His terrifying scream sent chills down the spine of everyone nearby. Such a dangerous situation caused real fear in Seo-jun, and he worriedly shouted his friend's name. Meanwhile, Seo-yoon, who is the only hunter nearby, has finally found a quiet place. She ran away from the site into the building of this enterprise. She was nicer inside the office than next to her boss, who was not to her liking. Her patience was stretched thin, but she couldn't leave irresponsibly without making sure the monster was truly dead. At that moment, she heard the conversations of workers who were standing nearby. They tried to speak in a whisper so that she would not hear them, but her hearing was too acute. The guys were really surprised and thought it was a real shame that her being a Class B hunter didn't live up to her grandfather's fame. For many, the Star Sword is a true hero, but for her, this name was a real burden, a label that she could not get rid of. From the cradle, her grandfather taught her how to be a hunter, but the bar he set was too high. She just couldn't get over it. All her life, she has been compared to her grandfather's hero, but she did not strive for this. Her real dream is to teach people. She repeatedly told her grandfather about this, but he was not going to listen to her. Each time he turned away from her request and asked her not to raise this topic again. Because she is the granddaughter of Star Sword, she has not been able to enjoy a normal life all this time. However, they came to a compromise, and she still founded the Hunter Academy. However, this was not without problems. All the children who came who wanted to become hunters hoped that they would be taught by that same Star Sword. As soon as they heard that the Star Sword had nothing to do with it, and his granddaughter would be doing the training, the guys turned around and left. No one stayed here long, no matter how much she begged them. Everyone immediately lost interest as soon as they learned that the Star Sword had nothing to do with their granddaughter's academy. Besides, even the few that remained left the academy after threats from her grandfather. Therefore, now her academy is still empty and unknown, although it is listed as an educational institution. All this time, she hoped that she would have at least one worthy student. At the moment of her dreams, a frightened employee of the enterprise ran nearby and panickedly urged everyone to run as far as possible. What Mrs. So-Yoon feared so much happened. The monster regained consciousness. Achoshi, fearing the terrifying monster, fell to the ground. This monster is a manticore. Its sudden revival put everyone in a terrifying situation. Addressing his young comrade, Minchul screamed and begged him to run as far away as possible. Seo-Jun understood that if nothing was done, his friend would die at the hands of the monster. Adding tension to the situation was the well-known fact that an ordinary person will never defeat a monster, just like an awakened person who is unable to use magic. The manticore is a 4th-level monster, which even a professional will have a hard time dealing with. Thinking about whether there were any hunters nearby, Seo-Jun immediately thought of So-Yoon, but she suddenly disappeared. The guy understood that she would not have time to save his friend, and that in the end, the monster would bite him to death. Facing a terrifying monster, the guy saw no other option but to start acting at that moment. Someone had to do something quickly, otherwise there was no way to save him. It was a moment of determination. Seeing no other option, Seo-Jun grabbed the metal pipe lying behind him. Grabbing such an unreliable weapon, he screamed and rushed towards the 4th-level monster. When he struck, he missed the manticore but caused it to jump back. Looking around, he asked Minchul to immediately run away. Rising to his feet, he declared that he would not leave him alone, but So-Jun shouted that in this case they would both be devoured. Once Minchul trusted him and ran to help, Seo-Jun was left alone. His body began to shake as he realized the difference in their strength. He needed to hold out until the hunter arrived at the site, but this terrifying monster terrified him. Seo-Jun had no experience at all in battles, and this was the first time he had ever picked up something like a weapon. However, at that very moment, he remembered the words of his mentor Buddha. Exploring the world and its essence, he felt true peace and gained control over the situation. The monster began to slowly approach in order to find the weak point of the strange but determined young man. Seo-Jun was completely focused on his surroundings, rejecting all emotions. Within a moment, the manticore rushed in his direction, but the guy stood unshakably in place, moving his metal pipe to the side. His wildly beating heart calmed down in an instant, and he even rushed towards the monster. Approaching the inexperienced guy, the 4th-level monster swung hard to strike him. Listening to Chiron's teaching, Seo-Jun gave up thinking. He moved so that it would not be too late. He had to trust his instincts and 6th sense. Within a moment, he deftly dodged the blow of the monster, whose claws were aimed at his neck. The next point-blank blow was too heavy. The prudent guy jumped back. Without further thought, he pushed off from the surface and found himself above the monster. The manticore tried to find him, but Seo-Jun, who jumped into the air, ended up in her blind spot. All this time, he relied only on his feelings, so now he had no idea how to continue the battle. While thinking about a surprise attack, he remembered the words of his mentor Xiang Yu, who said that strength alone is not enough because a fighter needs courage and zeal. By trusting them, Seo-Jun believed that he was capable of defeating this terrifying level 4 monster. The guy was more determined than ever. He thought that he would not only be able to cut it apart, but would have to do it to save his colleagues. Within a moment, his body began to release a huge amount of magical energy. The blow of a metal pipe of incredible power was aimed at the monster's body. A sudden explosion of energy raised a huge column of dust, and all the buildings around began to tremble. Hearing the explosion, So-Yun began to break through the crowd of workers, looking worried, heading towards the scene. Ahead, she saw only a huge column of dust that was slowly dissipating. First, a guy appeared in a worker's uniform with a metal stick in his hands. Everyone was shocked when they saw a defeated level 4 monster behind him. As soon as he realized what had happened, he began to laugh awkwardly, scratching the back of his head. The B-class hunter couldn't believe that some loader, who didn't even study at the academy, could handle such a monster with a metal stick instead of a normal weapon. Thanks to such efforts, Seo-Jun did significantly better in some lectures. His progress increased by as much as 10%. When he came to his senses, he remembered what was really worth worrying about. Ignoring the daughter of the Star Sword, he walked past her and headed towards his colleague, who almost got hurt due to the sudden revival of the monster. He tried to make sure his worried friend was okay. The girl was greatly alarmed by the fact that even after such an amazing event, this young man continues to remain calm and, first of all, worries about the others. In his defense, Seo-Jun said that he constantly trains, and that is why he managed to survive after the sudden battle. Meanwhile, the boss tried to assuage his guilt by saying that he was checking the manticore, but as it turned out, he was just a little mistaken. However, So-Yun didn't even pay attention to this old sycophant, because all her attention was directed to the strange guy with unimaginable potential. With a surprised look, she said that someone who could become a worthy student had appeared before her. After this incident, work continued, and when evening came, everyone went home. A free minute appeared, and so Jun immediately decided to take a look at the progress. The increase surprised him greatly because when he listened to the lectures, he had never seen such figures. It became clear that everything was due to the fact that he defeated the manticore. So he came to the conclusion that it is better to see once than to hear 1,000 times. Practice turned out to be the best way to improve progress in lectures. But in order to fight monsters, he must at least obtain a temporary license, which he can only obtain in classical state academies. You can't get into the dungeon without it. He came to the conclusion that he again needed to save for education. The financial burden only increased. At that moment, Seo-Yun was quietly following him, interested in his potential as a hunter. Suddenly she turned to him, apologizing for wanting to distract him for a few minutes of conversation. Kim So-Jun immediately recognized the granddaughter of the Star Sword, the huntress, who was collaborating with their company. He didn't know what she wanted from him, but he decided not to refuse the conversation. The girl suggested going straight to the conversation and started with trump cards, asking if he wanted to meet her grandfather. With his indifferent response, he shocked the old lady behind him because he refused her without hesitation. The girl, without waiting for an answer, replied that she had no doubt that he wanted. However, as soon as she realized that the guy had refused the offer, she shockedly asked him to stop. What he really wanted was to go home and listen to all the lectures as quickly as possible. It was the first time that Park So-Yun felt so awkward, because in her entire life she had never seen anyone refuse such an offer. She ended up telling him what really made her stalk the company employee. She was dumbfounded by his tone and indifference, because the guy was interested in why he should enter an academy where there was not a single student. Everything she knew about him seemed like a mystery. Before her eyes, he did some strange exercises with loads in the form of monsters, and also dealt with a manticore. Even if the manticore was greatly weakened, it was still a level 4 monster, and he cut it in half with a metal pipe. She was betting that he wanted to become a hunter. The girl, on the verge of despair, said that they had everything he needed, including good equipment. She admitted that she was the only one among the teachers, but guaranteed that she would devote all her time to his training. However, he still refused. This was the first time in her life that it was so difficult for her to get a student. Her last compelling argument on the verge of breakdown was the offer to become her grandfather's student. However, even so, he still refused. So Yun was amazed, because all the hunters dream of learning from the Star Sword, while this strange guy was so easily going to miss such an opportunity. She couldn't just let him go, so she shouted that without membership in the academy, he wouldn't be able to pass the written part of the hunter exam. Even to this argument, Seo-Jun replied that he could somehow handle it himself. Continuing to follow him, she nervously shouted that he should think about the advantage in the form of dungeons, because he was already in such shape that he could go on a raid. But for this, he needed to be an academy student. She stated that he was just wasting his time now. In response, Seo-jun said with indifference that only government-approved academies have the right to issue licenses. Discouraged, So-yun said that they had already been approved, and if he agreed, he would be able to get into the dungeon tomorrow. These words made the guy think, and he stopped. Seeing the doubts that appeared in the mind of the promising student, the girl decided that she could not retreat. She promised that if he really didn't need teachers, then she wouldn't interfere and would give him a place to train on his own. The most powerful argument that really worked in this situation was the phrase that she would not take a penny from him for training. At that moment, the guy turned around and asked whether he could really just join their academy. He didn't really believe in such a possibility, so he said that free cheese only comes in a mousetrap. He wanted to know what her real intentions were behind such an act. With her hand on her heart, So-yun sincerely promised that until he became a hunter, he would only be required to represent their academy in competitions. She also wanted him to tell everyone that he was a member of her organization. In response, the guy asked why him. Seo-jun understood perfectly well that this was an extremely advantageous offer, because in this way he would solve all his problems at once, while practically nothing was required of him. When asked why she chose him, So-yun stated that she saw great potential in him. With a kind smile, the shrill guy decided to trust her words. It was a mutually beneficial relationship, so he extended a kind look in her direction, saying his full name. In turn, Park So-yun also introduced herself properly and happily shook his hand, showing that she was ready for their collaboration to begin. The next day, he received a sudden call from Mr. Manchul. His comrade was visibly agitated. He asked if Seo-jun was behind the fact that their boss was fired. In fact, yesterday, before saying goodbye, he suddenly asked So-yun to report to their company that she didn't like their boss, and because of this, she no longer wanted to cooperate. He didn't expect to be fired immediately, but it was still a positive outcome for his former colleagues. In response, he said that he had nothing to do with it, and believed that the boss himself left so as not to be responsible for what happened with the revived monster. Meanwhile, he arrived at the meeting place, so Yun was already waiting for him at the building of the academy called Dream. Once they were inside, she handed him his temporary license. She settled everything, because the license began on the day he killed the manticore. Thus, he could avoid punishment for hunting without a license. Although he has not yet become a professional hunter, he has already taken the first step towards his dream. He was so excited about the success that he immediately asked So-yun how to go on raids. The girl replied with a smile that there was no need for such a story. The guy didn't understand what we were talking about. So-yun took him to the inventory area and presented him with 3 spears to choose from, after which she told him that when he decided, they would immediately go to the dungeon. The prudent teacher expected his eagerness to fight, so she prepared everything in advance. She signed a contract to one place that was located near Seoul. A low-level dungeon has recently opened here, suitable for a beginner who does not yet have enough experience in fighting monsters. As expected, So-jun easily dealt with the local monsters, which looked like mutants of ordinary rats. Another splinter fell without much resistance at the hands of Donatello, so the guy with the spear asked So-yun why she followed him, even though she promised that she would not interfere. In response, she said with a smile that she had no intention of interfering with him. She believed that she could not leave the only student at her academy unattended. With a sly expression on her face, she suggested that he consider himself to have a private lesson, which was an opportunity only for the most capable students. Seo-jun considered it an honor. Moving forward, she assumed it was his first time in the dungeon. That's why she wanted to accompany him. Even though only kobolds lived here, she asked him not to let his guard down. Kobolds are second-level monsters that are ideal for training beginners without combat experience. Fortunately, he easily penetrated their magical armor, just like in the fight with the manticore. However, what was strange was that attacks that were not imbued with mana should simply bounce off the defense of a monster of any level. It only meant that he was using it subconsciously. At the same moment, one of the monsters suddenly attacked him. So Yun worriedly shouted that he should be careful, but the guy deftly dodged the attack, relying only on his own feelings. Within a moment, he easily got rid of the monster, which was trying to take advantage of the surprise. And yet, the boy continued to wonder why his attacks were so effective even without the obvious release of magic. As soon as he was distracted by his phone, which from the outside looked off, he shouted with joy that his progress continued to slowly grow. So Yun continued to stand behind with a surprised expression on her face, not understanding what was happening to this strange student. Seo Jun noticed that his progress in lectures was not growing as quickly as from killing a manticore, but it was still better than just continuing to study the material he had learned a long time ago. In addition, he did not forget that you can make good money in dungeons. Turning to So Yun, he said with a kind smile that he was going to speed up a little. Destroying monsters one by one seemed to him to be similar to how players farm experience in video games. When they finished clearing out this novice dungeon, they returned to the academy. So Yun was still discouraged by his behavior. She immediately understood that something was wrong with him, but this time she was already scared that he continued to look at the switched-off phone and talk. Ever since they returned from the dungeon, he had been staring at his switched-off phone all the time. This happened for several hours, and all this time he looked as if he was devoid of common sense. This was just the beginning of the strangeness, because during the process of this strange meditation, he was constantly surprised by something he saw on the screen of his switched-off phone. She couldn't wrap her head around the picture she saw. Seo Jun looked like a newbie entering the dungeon for the first time, but immediately began hacking away at kobolds like a trained pro, after which he began doing strange exercises with the killed monsters. Moreover, he himself carried the bodies of the killed monsters instead of calling a special service. Such savings seemed too strange. Still, she was more worried that she would not be able to hide the appearance of a new student from her grandfather forever. This continued until midnight. The guy's shout about some kind of lecture made So Yun tensely wonder if she had made the right choice. While returning home, he received a message that made him sparkle with joy. He managed to earn 9.5 million won, although he had no idea that he could earn so much in a day. Although he carried and cut up the carcasses himself, it was not easy, but all his efforts paid off very well. However, the problems did not disappear because all this still took a lot of time and effort. He didn't even have time to listen to the lectures, as he had previously planned. While returning home, he even thought about asking Man Chul to work with him. He trusted him, so he decided that this way they could stay in touch. Moreover, if in this way he opens his own personal business, then they will both be in the black. Seo Jun decided that he would write to him as soon as he had free time. However, the issue of money was still relevant. He could start saving it again, but he thought it would be better to spend it usefully. By defending dungeons and earning money, he simultaneously increased his progress in completed lectures. But everything went somehow slower than he expected. They gave him nothing at all for the last kobold he killed. This made him wonder if there was a faster way to become stronger, to become as strong as the great celestial sage Sun Wukong. At the same moment, an unexpected realization of the exit came to him, and he shouted with joy, while frightening the man standing behind. He didn't have a penny before, so he forgot about another lecture on the basics of fighting with a staff and a spear. But once he tried to join, he was shocked by the 27 billion won entry fee. Such a sum corresponded to the name of the academy and seemed simply transcendental. The guy was plunged into the abyss of despair because even an S-class hunter could not earn that much. Considering this terrible information, he decided to postpone studying this art until later, believing that he had something to do anyway. Still, he wondered what else was on sale at the academy. Realizing that there was no money for lectures, he decided to look at the equipment that could be obtained on the academy market. When he looked at the Transcendence market, he could not believe his eyes, because there were legendary items on display, including the shield of Zeus and the spear of Longinus, which is one of the weapons of passion. Even if these were replicas, these were still legendary things that cannot be found not only in Korea, but most likely throughout the world. The guy couldn't believe that the academy called such items training equipment. Even he, who did not understand weapons, understood that this was something incredible. This was equipment made by members of the academy, which meant that it was all made by true transcendent-level masters. But as soon as he tried to get an individual price, he had to forget about his intentions and fall back into despair. The next morning he arrived at the academy early. So Yun, seeing him during another training session, noticed that he was training much harder than before. She assumed there was some reason for this that he had not yet revealed. In fact, he was just trying to take his mind off the shock. He knew that the spear would be expensive, and even assumed that even a copy could cost several million. Although aware of the risk, he still did not expect that they would ask for as much as 100 million won. Having finished the exercise, Sojun, rising to his feet, sadly and indistinctly said that everything again comes down to money. Even 100 million was a real robbery for the poor fellow, so he could not imagine that he would one day save 27 billion to listen to the lectures of the great sage. So Yoon distracted him by asking if he had heard about the academy tournament. Seojun had indeed heard about it, but didn't know the details. So Yoon explained that this is an event where different academies compete with each other, and each of them wants to prove that they are better than the rest. This tournament evaluates the level of the academy. Such competitions are very versatile. Currently, Dream Academy is at the 4th level, but if Seojun performs well, then they will move to the 3rd level. The higher the level, the better the academy is considered. Thanks to this, they will be able to receive greater support from the state. That's why all academies send their best students. Seojun understood perfectly well what she was driving at. And yet his teacher said that she wanted Seojun to represent their academy. In fact, it was quite tempting, since Kim was just wondering whether participation in the competition would affect his progress in lectures. Moreover, it was obvious that the tournament was also a martial arts practice. Without further thought, he nodded his head in response and admitted that this was a pretty good idea. So Yoon was surprised that he agreed to her proposal so quickly. In response, Seojun recalled that they had initially agreed on such mutual relations. After that, he asked to clarify how such tournaments are held. The director and at the same time teacher of the academy thoughtfully replied that everything was kept secret until the start of the competition. However, as far as everyone knows, the one who scores the most points for the raid and duel wins. Thoughtful, so Jun concluded that all his combat experience was limited to kobolds and manticores. He had no idea what it was like to fight people. At that moment, he wondered how he could give his best without such experience, and whether there would be someone who would agree to train with him in a duel. It didn't take long to look for the right person, because next to him was a real huntress. So June, turning to her, said that if she was not busy with anything, then it would be nice if she became his sparring partner. Although she wanted to refuse, she had no choice, because Seo Jun began to mock her, saying that she was just a coward. With the help of children's teasing, Seo Jun achieved his goal, but the real test was only ahead. This was a great opportunity to practice, but he shouldn't forget what level his opponent was. So Yun is a B-class huntress, and although this is far from the pinnacle of peaks, she was taught by the Star Sword itself. Of course, he was only a beginner who could not objectively judge real hunters, but he had no doubt that it would not be easy. And yet he was truly delighted with such an opportunity, because he had long wanted to find out what his teacher was capable of. Before starting, So Yoon asked if he knew that she was an active B-class huntress. In response, the determined guy prepared for battle and said that in this case, she should give him a small head start. Sighing heavily, she invited him to attack as soon as he was ready. Such an offer could not be refused, and the guy rushed into the attack with great enthusiasm. Seeing his speed, Seo Yun was a little disappointed. Easily dodging his attacks, she thought that she expected something more from him. In fact, his movements were quite fast, but extremely careless, so they were very easy to read. Remembering his recent battles, she assumed that she had simply overestimated his abilities. With some sadness on her face, she thought that he was just an ordinary beginner. Swinging a blade overflowing with magic, she wondered how he had the confidence to fight her. Having lost interest in his abilities, she decided to end the battle with one light blow, which would be enough for a beginner. To her surprise, the outcome was not at all what she expected. Seo Jun somehow miraculously managed to block her wooden training sword, overflowing with magic. In fact, it was not at all easy for him, but the very fact that he withstood this pressure was amazing. Now So-Yun completely forgot about her recent thoughts that he was an ordinary average beginner, because it was difficult to understand how he even managed to block her blow with magic. In this situation, the weapon should have jumped out of his hands, and her sword should have been at her throat. Moreover, having withstood such pressure, he even began to resist and tried to strike. Still, Park So-Yun couldn't let him get away with it and threw him aside with one swing. Now she looked at his strength completely differently. The determined student was still full of energy and had no intention of backing down. Wiping the blood from his mouth, he said that he would also fight seriously. Now he was even faster. He rushed into battle and his movements changed noticeably, and his attacks became much clearer. This couldn't even be compared to what happened before. If Seo-Jun had fought like this from the very beginning, So-Yun would not even have thought to doubt whether he was worthy to become the representative of their academy. As it turned out, he simply listened to the words of his mentor Chiron, who said that the battle should begin with obvious attacks. All this time he followed the plan and has already begun to change the situation with the help of feints, in other words, diversionary attacks. Her opponent was very difficult, and by delivering countless ordinary and unremarkable blows, he made sure that she, assessing the situation, could change tactics depending on the level of threat. Without giving her the opportunity to move, he continued to strike, distracting her attention. In response to her blows, he used the same obvious blocks in order to relax her attention. However, as soon as his next blow was repelled, he rotated the spear back. He repeated this until So-Yun opened herself up to his real attack. As soon as this moment arrived, he prepared to put all his strength into the blow. Seo-Jun was more focused than ever to take advantage. Seeing his huge swing and really serious attitude towards battle, So-Yun felt danger from him for the first time. Within a moment, there was a powerful explosion from the collision of their blows. As expected, So-Yun not only blocked his blow but also threw it aside. Still, she couldn't believe that Seo-Jun was actually capable of something like that. However, when she saw that she had overdone it a little and threw him into the wall with great force, she screamed in panic. She hit with all her might, without even thinking, so she immediately rushed towards him to make sure that he was at least alive. Rising to his feet as if nothing had happened, Seo-Jun began awkwardly scratching the back of his head and laughingly admitted that he had indeed lost in the end. In response, Seo-Yun couldn't hide her surprised expression as she realized that all this time, Seo-Jun had been hoping to defeat her, even though he knew he was fighting a B-class hunter. The girl did not know how to react to this, while Seo-Jun, continuing to scratch his ridiculous head, recognized the power of the huntress. Still, it was not possible to fight her like a monster, and this made him understand that the approach to fighting people should be a little different. However, he did not lose his positive attitude because he knew that if we talk about his difference with professionals, then it is worth noting that he still has everything ahead of him since he has just begun his journey. As he expected, although slightly, his statistics still increased. Now he realized that he should develop in different directions, just as he did in video games. So Yun couldn't believe that after such a beating, he would decide to ask if they could somehow repeat it. With a stupid smile on his face, he suggested that she have a few more duels before he went to the academy tournament. This would really be useful for him, but his zeal seemed strange given the fact that this time he suffered greatly in battle. Still, So Yoon came to the conclusion that she didn't care about his weirdness if he tried so hard. She had previously promised that she would work on his skills every evening, so she enthusiastically replied that she would have no problem doing anything he asked. Moreover, she mentioned that she was going to give him all the prize money. When the guy heard about the money, he was surprised because he didn't even think that there would be any reward besides the rating for the academy. After thinking a little, the girl tried to remember exactly what amount we were talking about. As soon as she remembered and said that the reward would be 100 million won. The guy is on the spot, realizing that this is exactly what he needs to buy a spear from the Transcendence store. Another coincidence indicated that he could not miss this opportunity. Suddenly for the teacher, with incredible fervor, he asked when this tournament would take place. It was only 2 weeks away, so Seo Jun was determined to gain as much experience as possible before he could earn the much-needed 100 million won. With incredible fervor, He began training and began to bombard the teacher with a lot of questions about whether she had sandbags and whether it was possible to use improvised objects as waiting agents. As a result, he, without listening to Seo Yoon to the end, took a huge stone and began to squat to improve his progress in lectures. So Yoon still didn't understand what was going on in his head, but she didn't mind not asking herself unnecessary questions if Seo-jun really proved himself to be a worthy student. 2 weeks later, the day of the tournament finally arrived. A large number of people gathered at the tournament site, among whom were a variety of contenders for victory. The huge crowd made the clumsy and insecure guy with big glasses and a green checkered shirt become confused. All the people around him came to the conclusion that he was suffocating, because this guy immediately began to talk about the fact that there were many more awakened people and interest in their battles had increased, which is why so many people gathered in front of the arena to watch the tournament. When he finally found the entrance, he began to hesitantly follow the directions and walked towards the room where the participants were. He was very nervous because he came alone, and he was also so scared that he could not move. This was not strange because compared to the insecure guy, all the other participants seemed like real warriors. Students from various academies that gathered in one place surprised him with their equipment, confidence, and big muscles. All the guys looked really strong, and this guy with the ridiculous eyepieces admitted that it shouldn't be surprising since academies send their best students. And yet, among this crowd of outstanding students, he managed to notice a calm guy sitting on a bench with an old weapon and a bag for a spear made from clothes. Everyone around was whispering that Seo-jun was some kind of hillbilly from the backwoods. It seemed to them that he was simply trying to withdraw into himself so as not to attract unnecessary attention. In fact, Kim heard everything perfectly well and even understood that from the outside he looked like a fool. But this did not bother him. However, among all these guys, only the guy in the checkered shirt had a different opinion about the strange participant. He was inspired and touched by the thought that he had managed to find a poor fellow like himself. It reminded him of him from the past, and the feeling when you come to a new class where you don't know anyone and try to pretend to be busy by being glued to your phone. Seo-jun looked exactly like this. The camaraderie began to grow, even though Seo-jun wasn't even aware of it. Still, the modest and shy guy decided to say hello to someone who seemed like a brother to him. This is Lee Mingi. He is 19 years old and has also been awakened since birth. He asked permission to sit next to him. Meanwhile, the guys in the background began to fuss, and things began to move towards a fight even before the start of the tournament. Lee Mingi, like a real choker, knew perfectly well who they would be dealing with. Pointing his finger at a guy in a ridiculous helmet, with an axe who relies only on his brute strength for everything, he said that this is Jang Dak-chul, a promising student at Gochuri Academy. It was unclear what this conflict was about, but the guy with long hair remained calm and tried to calm the disgruntled student of the Gochuri Academy, although he did not deny himself ridicule, saying that Dak-chul's brain was swollen with muscles. The bold speech came from a very strict student at Mint Academy, a guy with a scar on his left eye named Lee Keel-min. It was not for nothing that he was confident in himself, because he was known for being considered the best student of his educational institution. Lee Mingi continued the story by saying that Chol-min is very unusual and fights with twin daggers. In fact, Seo-jun only at that moment looked away from his phone with the thought of why this obsessive guy was telling him this unnecessary information. At one point, the situation became much more interesting, because a red-haired guy in a black tuxedo intervened in the conflict. After saying that they should keep quiet, everyone around them looked around and fell silent. This guy's words meant a lot because he was Lee Ju-hwan, a student at Revenant Academy. Seo-jun, not knowing who he was only surprised at how quickly he managed to pacify the raging students. This time, Lee Mingi shared some really important information. He explained that Lee Ju-hwan is a gifted student at Revenant Academy, and to everyone present, he is the winner of this tournament from the very beginning. Seo-jun asked if he meant the contender for victory. However, as it turns out, this guy is so strong that he usually avoids such events. However, something happened at the academy, and he was forced to join. Now, the outcome of the tournament was obvious to everyone who knew him. After that, he even mentioned that the granddaughter of the Star Sword invited Lee Ju-hwan to her academy, but he refused. The fact that he refused this offer gave Li Mingyi reason to think that this guy was very confident and was hiding something. In fact, he had no idea that Mrs. So Yoon invites literally everyone she sees to her academy. At one point, Ju Huan shouted loudly and furiously that he did not understand why he had to compete with such non-entities. As it turned out, their academy was forced to send him to this tournament, because earlier, his uncle prevented them from moving to the 3rd level. Li Yung-hwan was truly furious, thinking that winning such a primitive tournament would not bring him recognition. The situation around his Revenant Academy haunted him, and he even began to regret that he had refused So Yun's offer. In fact, he refused because he didn't want to study at some unknown academy. Only now, realizing that So Yun was the granddaughter of the Star Sword, did he think that he could simply use her for his ascension, and then simply get rid of her. Looking around, he noticed Seo Jong, the only guy, who was looking in his direction with curiosity and some confusion, as if he was not afraid because of his presence. In fact, he saw him as a simpleton, which only reinforced the question of how bad things were for him. While Li Mingyi was excitedly asking his new friend how to avoid a conflict with Li Jun-hwan, Seo Jun was deep in thought about how much money he could get if he fought a man of such a reputation. Still, there was no time for dialogue, because the first stage of the Academy tournament had been announced. Over the past 2 weeks, Seo Jun has been trying to achieve 30% according to Qiron and Xiang Yu's lectures. However, he has not noticed any significant changes in strength or anything else. Previously, the difference in progress was more noticeable, but even so, he was still not afraid to move forward. Compared to the others, he lacked experience, and he understood this perfectly well. Still, he tried to make up for their gap by training with So Yun and fighting in the dungeons during those 2 weeks. Now it didn't matter to him who was in front of him, a man or a monster. Seo Jun was confident that he could get the 100 million one he needed so much. Meanwhile, the speaker said that it was time for the first test, which would be a maze with monsters. The audience was delighted, because they had never seen something like this before. Those who had not yet managed to take their seats were just rushing to the arena in order to be in time before the start of the test. One of these spectators, who was a little late, nervously barked at his friend for choosing seats in the corner. He was so enraged by the situation that he didn't even notice how he hit the girl standing next to him with his shoulder. Realizing that he had acted rudely, the man began to apologize in order to somehow make amends. The girl did not consider this to be excessive rudeness and said that everything was fine. When the man walked on and took a seat, his friend asked if he knew the girl he kept looking back at. He replied that he didn't know who she was, but for some reason he continued to think that she reminded him of someone. Having missed this moment, the guy with the camera told him that the first stage of the Academy tournament would be a race in the labyrinth. Participants must escape the maze without attacking other participants while eliminating monsters in order to gain some clues. Although this was a 4th-level competition, those present doubted that the organizers had created an ordinary maze that would be passed by the luckiest one. The 2 spectators believed that the judges wanted to test whether the contestants had all the necessary skills to raid the dungeon. Lost in thought, the man in the purple shirt said that this year all the students look pretty blue. At the same moment, his comrade with the camera excitedly shouted that he should pay attention to how the main contender for victory was fighting. Zhang Huan was simply incredible. He was already an excellent master of magic and could easily destroy level 4 monsters with just one attack. Such a test seemed like some kind of trifle against the background of his incredible brute strength and cold prudence. The audience was delighted, because this guy's level was undoubtedly higher than that of the other students. As soon as the talk turned to the fact that this guy was none other than Li Ju-hwan, So Yoon realized who they were talking about. She took off, realizing that he was someone who could one day become her student. So Yoon began to wonder what such a monster would forget at such a tournament. As soon as she took off, the man in the purple shirt looked around, again thinking that she reminded him of someone. In fact, So Yoon was trying to hide her identity, so she immediately turned away because she didn't want anyone to realize who she was. Meanwhile, Seo Jun hasn't made much progress through the labyrinth. However, after several blows with a spear, he came to the conclusion that it was simply impossible to break through the walls and thus get out. Now he came to the conclusion that he should take the test in the same way as others do. He even began to regret that he had not watched the lecture of Theseus, the hero of Roman and Greek myths, who is famous for defeating the Minotaur and getting out of the labyrinth. After a few tens of meters, he came to a fork where he had to choose the right path. Leaning against the wall, he decided that he would follow the main rule of movement in labyrinths. He should have just stuck to one side and eventually found a way out. However, the problem was how long it would take him to get through the entire maze in this way. The test result depended on the speed. In order not to hesitate, the guy headed to the left. However, after a few steps, he felt an indescribable feeling. He still didn't understand why, but it seemed to him that instead of sticking to the left, he should take a different path. He suggested that this was the sixth sense, the intuition that Chiron talked about. There was no other choice, so he began to slowly walk forward. By relying on intuition, he was able to experience the true value of the sixth sense. Meanwhile, the challenge host continued to report that some academy students were dropping out of the tournament. Seo-jun assumed that they were all constantly fighting monsters that were stronger than them. However, unlike the others, he was the only one who never met a single monster in this labyrinth. As he thought about this, he suddenly realized that his intuition was not only telling him how to find a way out, but also telling him how to avoid the monsters. Kim wondered if he would be able to foresee the future if he achieved 100% of the lecture and mastered metamorphosis. In a moment of sweet dreams, he was suddenly distracted by a sad and pitiful voice from behind. Somehow Lee Mingi managed to find him. The frightened guy, addressing Seo-jun as his brother, warned him that a monster could be waiting around every corner, one of those that had already dealt with a dozen students. Looking around in fear, fearing to meet a monster, Mingi said that Seo-jun walked as confidently as if he knew the way. In order not to attract unnecessary attention and not prolong the conversation, Kim justified himself that he was going wherever he wanted. Lee Mingi was simply amazed by his irresponsibility and screamed that he couldn't go wherever he wanted because it could end badly. Then he said that he would help him because he knew how to get out of the maze. Showcasing his incredible intelligence, he boasted that he had heard that the exit from the maze was easy to find if you used the left or right hand method. In response, Seo-jun said that it was too long, so you should just trust your feelings. When the guy in the plaid shirt, denying this proposal, said that they could get lost, Seo-jun suggested that they split up. He had no idea why Lee Mingi decided to tag along like a stray dog. Adjusting his glasses, Mingi shouted that they should stick together since they were brothers in misfortune. Seeing the misunderstanding on Seo-jun's part, Mingi awkwardly said that he did not come from the academy, but himself, and looking at him, he decided that he was also a loner. Only after these words did Seo-jun realize why this strange and absurd guy decided to talk to him. His world was turned upside down by the words that weaklings better stick together. Seo-jun did not consider himself a weakling and could not understand at all why Lee Mingi decided that he was one. With incredible surprise, he suggested that he could really look like that from the outside. While Seo-jun was trying to recover from such an unexpected and far from pleasant compliment, Lee Mingi, feeling trust in his personality, reached into his pocket and said that he would make an exception for him and show him something incredible. The joyful, ridiculous guy had a blush on his cheeks as soon as he showed his new friend a photo of his little sister, who looked exactly like him. Even this trick did not work, and Seo-jun decided to go alone. He turned around and moved on, saying that he was glad to chat, but had to deal with the passage of the maze. At that moment, Lee Mingi let go of his sword and tearfully grabbed his leg, begging him not to leave without him. Seo-jun felt that he was in a very unpleasant situation. Lee Mingi was very pestering, but Kim understood that even an awakened person could be scared in such a place. He believed that he himself would have been scared if he had ended up in such a place at the age of 19. On the one hand, Lee Mingi talked a lot and it was irritating, but in the waiting room, he still said a lot of useful things. But even this was not enough. Seo-jun considered him a rival, because as much as 100 million won was at stake. Remembering his words about being alone, Seo-jun inquired about why his sister and parents did not come to the arena to support him during the tournament. Having lowered his eyes, Lee Mingi paused for a short time and sadly said that his parents died, so he has no one except his sister. These words brought understanding from Seo-jun. He was also lonely in life because his parents died in a car accident. Seeing that Seo-jun began to feel awkward about this matter, Lee Min-gi began to fuss on the spot and asked him not to worry about it since it was a long time ago. He just wanted to say that his sister was still little and could not come to support him. Suddenly, Lee Min-gi still found support from a very cold and indifferent participant. Seo-jun said that he was right when he said that they were brothers in misfortune. With a kind smile, the Dream Academy representative said that they could go further together and he would not mind. However, he did not forget to warn that this does not mean that they are now a team, because the prize for first place should go to him. After these words, Seo-jun rushed forward, and Lee Min-gi hovered in place, not understanding his friend's unexpected behavior. In a few minutes, they passed several more turns, Seo-jun moving so fast that his new friend could not keep up with his pace. Seo-jun recalled the words that he was not going to wait for him, and if Lee Min-gi did not want to become a burden for him, then he should speed up a little. The guy in the plaid shirt thought this behavior was very strange. He could not understand why Kim was so confident in his decisions and did not hesitate at all, despite the danger of the labyrinth. The friend leading ahead did not even think about choosing the path. It seemed that Seo-jun knew in advance where they should go. Indeed, during all this time, they never met a single monster. At one point, they reached a dead end. Seo-jun stared at the wall, while Lee Min-gi, tired of such a rush, said that they should move on before someone else finds a way out. However, Seo-jun was in no hurry. Leaning his hand against the wall, he said that they were already close. As it turned out, there was a hidden door in front of him that led to the exit from the labyrinth. Lee Min-gi couldn't believe his eyes, but in this way they actually ended this test. Within a moment, the host of this stage of the tournament announced the name of the winner, and even managed to set a new record for completing the maze. Seo-jun completed the test in just 27 minutes, while the current best time ever took more than 1 hour. The audience was simply shocked when the winner was announced. Moreover, everyone was watching Lee Ju-hwan. He continued to fight, and everyone realized that somehow he had failed to take first place in the maze. So-yun was simply in shock. She could not believe that her ridiculous student was capable of such a miracle. In fact, Kim Seo-jun did not consider this a big victory, because all this time he was hoping that he would be able to gain at least some progress by fighting monsters. At the end of this test, Lee Min-gi could not come to his senses for a long time, and come to terms with the fact that he really took second place only thanks to luck. Everyone present in the waiting room could not believe that a new record had been set by some student at the CD Dream Academy. This was the first time they had heard about this educational institution, so they believed that this modest guy was probably the son of some influential person. The whispers of the other students prevented Seo-jun from concentrating on the lecture. At one point, he noticed that Young-hwan suddenly approached him. Seeing how he approached the amazing newcomer, everyone present instantly fell silent, afraid to make even a sound. Despite the tension, Seo-jun was still calm. Looking into the eyes of the most promising participant in the tournament, he wondered why he was looking at him so much. Lee Young-hwan was clearly dissatisfied with the result of the first stage, but did not feel any threat from the Dream Academy student. Turning away, with a self-confident smile, he asked the others why they believed so much in this loser. The red-haired guy believed that Seo-jun was able to set a new record in the maze only due to luck. At the moment when everyone was distracted by conversations regarding Lee Jong-hwan's words, Seo-jun decided to return to studying the lecture, but at the same moment they were interrupted by the appearance of the tournament representative. A guy in a blue tracksuit with lists in his hands was just about to explain what awaits them at the second stage. This time, the participants had to fight each other in one-on-one battles. Since they were all at the 4th level, so that everyone would be on an equal footing, they were forbidden to enhance their weapons with mana. However, they were still able to strengthen their bodies. Not everyone was happy with this news. Seo-jun was still calm. He was extremely interested in who would become his opponent. 32 students made it to the second stage, and in this case there must be 5 rounds of duels. However, as soon as the tournament representative announced that they would now begin to draw up the tournament bracket, he was suddenly stopped by one of the participants. Suddenly for Seo-jun, the guy announced that he was going to abandon the duel and leave the tournament. Meanwhile, So-yun decided to leave the arena to a more secluded place where she would not be in danger of being discovered. She nearly revealed her identity the moment she screamed in surprise at her student's victory. Being in a very secluded place, she did not expect to hear loud conversations. Looking around the corner, she saw a place where spectators began to place bets on the winner. As it turned out, the second stage was going to start immediately from the semifinals, since most of the students refused to participate in the tournament. It seemed that now there was no point in betting because everyone present firmly believed in Li Juhuan's victory. Because of this, the odds for his victory were quite small. As soon as the guys started talking about how no one in their right mind would bet on another participant, some crazy guy came up to the table and said that he wanted to bet 100 million won on Kim Seo-jun. The man in a dark robe shocked everyone present with his statement. The guys convinced him that this was a rash decision because this student simply turned out to be too lucky, and no one had ever heard of his academy before. Seo-yun, observing this event from the side, became interested in the identity of the stranger. The mysterious man in a black robe who emitted very strong magic seemed very mysterious and unpredictable. Meanwhile, Seo-jun himself was bored while waiting for the duel lists to be formed. A few minutes ago, a sudden event occurred. Many students began to refuse to participate in the second stage. Excited, Li Mingyi explained in a whisper that he had previously heard that in fourth-level tournaments this is not uncommon, because the same ones always win here. This behavior was due to the fact that everyone was afraid of Li Juhuan. Participants spread rumors that he didn't care about the rules at all, so after a battle with him you could remain crippled for the rest of your life. However, not only Juhuan, but also the guy with the helmet on his head, as well as the participant with the scar on his left eye, seemed to be very impressive opponents. Doubts spread with incredible speed. One by one, the participants left the waiting room. Li Mingyi would have run away himself, but he was so scared that he literally stuck to the bench, and so only 5 semi-finalists remained. An hour later, the lists of duel pairs were presented. In the first fight, Kim So-jun and Jang Dak-chul were supposed to fight. In the second fight, Li Juhuan and poor fellow Li Mingyi were going to fight. Since there were only 5 participants, Li Chul-min received an automatic win. Seo-jun began to think that if he won the first stage, then most likely, if he makes it to the finals, regardless of the result, he will become the winner of the tournament. At one point, he noticed his comrades' excitement. Li Mingyu was trembling with fear, and when Seo-jun noticed this, the guy in the checkered shirt whispered in panic that he couldn't believe that he was going to duel with Li Juhuan. Despite his incredible fear, he still had enough energy to shake his new friend. With a kind smile, Seo-jun said that Li Mingyi was acting stupid because he wrote himself down as a loser, even though his fight had not even started. Seeing his friend's condition, he suggested that he withdraw his candidacy, because with such an attitude, nothing would really happen for him. With his eyes downcast, Li Mingyi sadly said that he couldn't just leave the tournament. Meanwhile, a tournament official entered the room and announced that Kim Seo-jun and Jang Dak-chul should prepare to enter the arena. Getting up from the bench, So-jun gave friendly advice at the end and said that if Mingyi decided to fight, then he should fight to the very end. After all, who knows, maybe he will be lucky and even win. After these words, Li Mingyi grabbed his hand in surprise. He asked in confusion why So-jun was not worried before such a difficult battle. With a confident smile, Seo-jun replied that he only cares about how much experience he will be given for this fight. This answer naturally did not satisfy his friend's interest, but Seo-jun simply left, motivated by the opportunity to earn 100 million won. As soon as he entered the stage, the presenter announced the continuation of the tournament and the beginning of its second stage. The first to be presented was the new record holder of the race in the labyrinth, who was able to bypass all the monsters. Seo-jun was presented as a participant shrouded in mystery, because no one could say for sure whether he was talented or just plain lucky. At the moment of thunderous applause towards Seo-jun, he suddenly heard from his opponent that luck would not help him here. Jang Dak-chul was so self-confident that he didn't even hide it. Moreover, he was presented as one against whose crushing power any tricks were useless. With a loud laugh, an arrogant guy with a ridiculous helmet on his head said that student Kim spent all his luck on the first stage, where he managed to set a new tournament record. In response, Seo-jun said that it was too early to judge which of them was unlucky. These words seriously angered his opponent. As soon as the referee announced the start of the battle, Dak-chul furiously attacked, shouting that he would make Seo-jun regret his bold words. However, these threats did not bring any results, because the Dream Academy student was more determined than ever, because a prize of 100 million won was at stake. As soon as Li Mingyi heard that his friend's battle had already begun, he began to worry even more. Glancing at his opponent, who was standing to the side with an angry expression on his face, he decided that now was a bad time to worry about others. He had to face Li Juhuan, which seemed terrifying from the very beginning. Even though he was trembling with fear, Seo Jun's words were what kept him in control. But just as he thought that he and Seo Jun were no match for these guys, those in the waiting room screamed in surprise at the shocking news. None of those present could believe that the duel would end in the blink of an eye. The winner of the semi-final of the second stage of the tournament was Kim Seo-jun from Dream Academy. In response to the result of the first fight, the red-haired guy, who was previously considered the winner of the tournament, arrogantly said that the scum should have a place among the scum. Despite his words, Li Mingyi felt much better once he learned that his fellow sufferer was able to defeat his opponent. Looking at his future opponent, he said that he too would be a winner. As expected, the fight of the first couple began with an aggressive attack by an offended guy in a ridiculous helmet with horns. One could not expect anything less from Chan Dak-chul. His strength was truly crushing. However, Seo Jun also surprised everyone present, because instead of blocking the blow, he easily dodged it. Moreover, the Dream Academy student continued to maintain a frantic calmness, which caused self-doubt on the part of the enemy. Dak-chuk attacked without respite and even managed to run out of steam, while his morale was plummeting due to the fact that all this time Kim looked like he was not taking him seriously. Enraged by the situation, the opponent with the axe could not gain control of the situation at all, and wondering why his attacks were not working, continued to move forward. At one point, he seemed to go crazy, so he strengthened his body with an aura and rushed to the attack with a powerful swing of the axe and shouting that now the vile Seo Jun would not be able to dodge. However, at that very moment the games were over, because the student from the Dream Academy took the matter seriously and easily knocked the heavy axe out of the hands of his opponent. Dak-chul couldn't believe what happened. His body trembled with the realization that his axe was behind him for the first time in his life. It was simply incredible. No one expected this, and did not even think that the battle would end in the blink of an eye. The muscular fighter was in despair, as he could not accept that he had lost to someone he considered just a lucky fool. He turned out to be weaker, and the first winner of the second stage was Seo Jun, who did not even use a small part of his combat potential. As expected, he was very disappointed with this fight. His progress in lectures only increased slightly, since the actual battle never took place. Previously, he thought that by fighting with other students, he could easily reach a new level of understanding of the arts. In addition, there will be much fewer fights than expected, because most of the participants simply abandoned the second stage. The battle pass was already ending, and Seo Jun was afraid that he would not have time to master the basic knowledge in 50 days. He needed to tighten his belt to at least save up for a spear and renew his pass to the Transcendence Academy. He couldn't afford to lose in this tournament. When he returned to the waiting room, he couldn't understand why Mingyi was so nervous. As it turned out, his friend was simply delighted with the battle and continued to be surprised that Seo Jun was so strong. A long conversation never took place, because a few minutes later, a representative of the tournament entered the waiting room and said that the participants in the second fight should prepare to enter the arena. Li Juhuan went first and even roughly pushed his opponent out of the way. The already trembling Li Mingyi considered this insolence to be normal behavior, and instead of being indignant, decided to remember the moment when, together with Seo Jun, they managed to cope with the first stage. He admitted that as soon as he saw him, he felt a kindred spirit, and therefore when he defeated a formidable opponent, he was so happy as if he had won himself. He had a bit of jealousy at that moment, but more importantly, his friend's success gave him at least some motivation to fight. Pouring out his soul, Li Mingyi even mentioned that he is never lucky and does not have the talent or strength like Seo Jun. All that moved him forward was the unquenchable desire to please his little sister. He hoped that one day she would be proud of him. When he was asked to hurry up, he ran towards the exit, and Seo Jun asked him to give it his all. As soon as Li Mingyi entered the arena, He began to feel nervous due to the huge number of spectators who were eagerly awaiting the start of the battle. As soon as he began to support himself with words that he could handle it, Zhu Huan began to get angry. He despised his opponent, whom he considered an ordinary weakling, so he nervously asked him to shut up and stop mumbling under his breath. In this tournament, the red-haired arrogant guy was infuriated by absolutely everything. He even felt humiliated by the fact that he was forced to participate in such an event, where he was surrounded only by losers. Looking into his eyes, he wondered how he got to the point where his opponent would be such trash. To him, Li Mingyi was nothing more than prey, a useless nobody who lived only to be eaten. Considering his opponent his prey, Zhu Huan decided that in this fight, he just needed to remind the scum where he belonged. He was even more infuriated by the fact that he failed to take first place during the first stage. He believed that he was head and shoulders above everyone else, so he had to demonstrate his superiority in absolutely everything. Although Li Mingyi was visibly trembling, he was not going to give up and held his blade in the direction of the contender for winning the tournament. The red-haired guy was incredibly angry with the knowledge that his ridiculous opponent believed that he had at least some chance of winning. He couldn't wait to put an end to this fight. A few minutes later, the judge announced the start of the fight. Li Mingyi kept saying that he could handle it, just like his brother Xiao Jun. Considering what was happening to be a real humiliation, Zhu Huan only thought that there was no point in this tournament in the first place. As soon as the fight began, Zhu Huan charged furiously to end the fight with just one blow. To his surprise, this was not enough, and Li Mingyi miraculously managed to resist. Li Zhu Huan continued his attack and unleashed a mountain of furious, precise blows on his opponent. Trying to withstand the stubbornness of his opponent, poor Mingyi looked tied hand and foot, and the audience doubted that he would hold out even a little longer. His opponent had already begun to lose his composure and even managed to say that he could not believe that his opponent was such a pathetic brat. After these words, he delivered a powerful blow to the poor fellow's stomach with his handle, shouting that he shouldn't have stuck his head out of his village. Such a strong blow threw Li Mingyi aside. Crouching on his knee, he began to writhe in pain. Feeling the difference in their strength, he still admitted that he had no chance of winning. The realization that they were on completely different levels sent tremors through his body again. However, he could not leave just like that, because all this time he was only thinking about the fact that he wanted his sister to be proud of her older brother. At that moment, he remembered his brother and his success. Unexpectedly for all the spectators, Li Mingyi began to rise to his feet, despite the pain. He knew that there was no point in counting on victory, but now his task was to hit this vile bastard at least once. Putting all his strength into the blow, Li Mingyi rushed into the attack in order to at least catch the enemy with the tip of his sword. He couldn't count on more, yet they were on completely different levels. Within a moment, the fight was over. The crowd began to cheer. As they predicted, the winner of the second battle was Li Zhu Huan from Revenant Academy. The audience was delighted and only confirmed that the rest of the participants in this tournament are not even suitable for such a monster. Zhu Huan had no place in the fourth-level competition because everyone understood that this brute was a master of his craft. However, Li Mingyi still managed to achieve his goal because, albeit slightly, he still hurt his opponent. Moreover, the public also noticed a small cut on the face of the invincible Zhou Huan, which was left to him by a completely ordinary boy. The arrogant, red-haired Revenant Academy student was beside himself with rage. Considering himself an elite, he was filled with rage at the realization that some ignorant weakling had managed to hook him. Then he suddenly turned to the judge and said that he was withdrawing from the tournament. The man in the yellow t-shirt was shocked by the words of the main contender for victory, so he asked in surprise how to understand this. Everything came to a head at that moment, when the inadequate red-haired guy walked up to his already beaten, losing opponent and furiously kicked him in the face. Addressing the audience, he shouted that this tournament was a bunch of losers. He accused the organizers of accepting just anyone, after which he stated that therefore they would not be able to achieve anything above the fourth level. Tournament officials immediately rushed into the arena, saying that the fight was already over, and if he did not stop, they would be forced to take action. However, in response, the arrogant Zhu Huan said that he was sick of looking at this pitiful spectacle of losers who want to become hunters. After these words, he completely placed his foot on the head of the poor fellow lying on the ground. Within a moment, Seo-jun burst into the arena and rushed to attack the inadequate, arrogant bastard, who had completely lost his fear. After that, he said that he was tired of this, and if Ju Huan insisted so much, then he would beat him right now, without waiting for the finale. When a Dream Academy student asked the impudent red-haired opponent to remove his foot from the head of his work, he refused. The patience of the guy with the spear was already at its limit. In response to the self-confident words, he furiously swung his spear, and the insolent man was forced to jump back. As soon as he scared off the enemy, he immediately sat down next to his comrade to find out if he was conscious. Li Mingyi was injured and could barely speak. Seeing this picture, the arrogant Ju Huan said that it was very touching. Seo-jun couldn't stand by. Looking at the daring opponent who considered himself an elite, he sternly asked if he really enjoyed looking down on people. Until the very end, he could not understand what was wrong with him, because no one in their right mind would put their foot on another person's head. In response, the arrogant academy student revenant said that he was sickened that some hillbilly forgot his place and even dared to enter the arena to fight him. Seo-jun still didn't understand his behavior and asked if they really couldn't even dream, since they were worse than him. Ju Huan took his words as some kind of joke and started laughing, saying that he didn't know that in their time anyone still believed in such fairy tales. It seemed strange to him that someone thought that if they trained hard, then they would succeed. The watching public did not understand how the judges allowed something like this to happen. As it turned out, the judges simply could not interfere in this conflict, because this was the order from above. They could only watch what was happening. The fight was inevitable, and So-yun was well aware that her student was weaker than his opponent. And yet she did not interfere and only watched excitedly, trusting her student. Meanwhile, Ju Huan had already begun to lose patience, and angrily calling his opponent a non-entity, said that he would now demonstrate to him how the world works. He believed that people without talent are nothing more than scum, and to achieve success, you need to go over your head. Seo-jun couldn't come to terms with his words. Ju Huan really believed that there is no place for dreams in this world, and all awakened people are divided into worthy and losers. And yet he couldn't hate him, because in truth he used to think so himself. During these 9 painfully long years, when he endured everything just to become a hunter, he was constantly faced with a harsh reality. He hated himself because he had neither money nor talent. He hated himself for his helplessness. Work only helped him stay afloat, but he could not achieve more, because most of the money went to pay off loans. In his reflections, he came to the conclusion that, probably, there is nothing more pathetic than clinging to something that cannot be achieved through hard work. He asked himself many times how his life would have turned out if he had given up and chosen a different path. However, after a while he got rid of these doubts and even now did not lose his determination in the face of a formidable opponent. Addressing the judge, he asked him to take care of Mingyi. Seo-jun took a few steps towards the enemy, thinking that he would not repeat his mistake again. Previously, he constantly succumbed to fear and doubted himself. This is how many people fall into despair. However, now he was ready to tear his opponent to pieces in order to erase his arrogant grin and the opinion that people without talent are nothing more than scum. With a cold look, he said that he would teach a lesson in politeness to someone who had never felt superior to ordinary guys. After these words, Seo-jun rushed to attack, and the judge began to shout that he had to stop, because this was against the rules of their tournament. These words no longer meant anything to him. The Dream Academy student began to spin his spear to deliver a quick and unexpected strike. Seeing this, Ju Huan sighed arrogantly. After that, he angrily said that Seo-jun must be joking since he dared to challenge him. Seo-jun landed a powerful spear strike with a high jump, while Ju Huan was able to block using his huge two-handed sword. The red-haired guy did not feel threatened by him at all, and said with a laugh that the pathetic bug would regret that he decided to show up in front of him. He then swung his sword with ease, throwing Seo-jun aside. Without losing speed, he charged furiously, grabbing his sword with both hands. The madman tried to strike at high speed, but Seo-jun managed to jump back. Then he was forced to constantly block furious blows, and several small cuts appeared on his face. Kim recognized that his opponent was very strong, so it was not surprising why everyone thought so highly of him. In the fight with Dak Chul, he did not even doubt his victory. Now the situation had changed, and Seo-jun felt overwhelming pressure from the enemy. Catching himself on this thought, he immediately decided to listen to the advice of his mentors. Seo-jun trusted his feelings and began to simply go with the flow, so as not to strain himself with unnecessary thoughts in a responsible battle. Within a moment, he threw his opponent aside. Naturally, the arrogant Zhu Huan was infuriated by such insolence. When the judge said they had to stop immediately, the red-haired guy furiously shouted for them not to interfere. Anyone who considered himself a predator, the top of the food chain, could not come to terms with the resistance of his prey. However, in this battle, his opponent was different from the others. He couldn't understand why someone he considered trash was looking at him as if he were a predator himself. Now Zhu Huan was really angry. He mockingly said that dreaming is not harmful, but the pathetic non-entity should see for himself what will happen to his dreams when he is faced with cruel reality. Within a moment, he closed the distance with incredible speed. Then he launched a furious blow, which Seo-jun still managed to block. The impact was so strong that the surface of the arena began to collapse. Although Seo-jun began to tremble from such incredible pressure, the fact that he was able to block this blow only angered his opponent more. As Zhu Huan continued to throw punches, he noticed something strange. He realized that his pathetic opponent was becoming stronger with each blocked blow, like a monster growing right before his eyes. Within a moment, Seo-jun himself rushed to attack, and this time they exchanged blows. Zhu Huan was furious and began to lose his temper because he could not accept the fact that some brat managed to push him away. Just like Li Mingyi gave him a small cut, Seo-jun also did something that completely freaked out the red-haired guy. Enraged, Zhu Huan went mad and began to release mana against his weapon. Seo-jun did not expect that the opponent would break the rules of the tournament and start using aura. He himself did not yet know how to control his own mana, so he had nothing to oppose. The judges and other tournament workers began to panic and rushed into the arena screaming, realizing that the crazed red-haired guy was going to kill his opponent. Seo-jun himself understood perfectly well that running away was the best option. However, at that same moment, he began to have an internal dispute, as a result of which he realized that if he ran away, he would betray everything he had learned. At that moment, he began to remember the words of his teacher, and it seemed to him that he was nearby. One day, Xiang Yu, like his student, entered into a battle, the outcome of which was a foregone conclusion. He lost, and there was no changing that. Then, for the first time, he felt despair because he was afraid of defeat. However, he rushed into battle and fought, because this is the true spirit of a warrior. Xiang Yu taught him that even if everything points to his defeat, he must continue to fight like a beast and believe in his victory no matter what. Remembering the words of his mentor, Seo-jun resolutely clenched his spear, because he did not intend to show his back to the enemy. The force that tears mountains out of the ground will erase any barriers, and the spirit that can turn the whole world over will dominate it. As soon as Seo-jun charged, he unknowingly began to release his mana, and a blue aura surrounded his spear. Seeing how much his opponent had changed, the enraged Zhu Huan, who believed only in talent, shouted that he was the only predator here, while the rest of the students were just litter on which he would continue to wipe his feet. Tournament officials rushed to stop them, but it was too late. A moment later, two furious fighters attacked each other with a wild cry. There was a powerful explosion of energy, which raised a column of dust and made it difficult to see what the result of this collision was. But just as the heat began to dissipate, the public saw that the clash had emerged with a winner. An inexperienced fighter, who was considered an ordinary lucky newcomer, managed to win this battle. Zhu Huan lost consciousness and fell to the ground, while Seo-jun silently tried to stand, leaning his trembling body on a long spear. The audience was shocked by what happened and began chanting the name of the winner of this fierce battle. Seo-jun also couldn't contain her surprise. She was shocked, because she saw how rapidly her student developed. 2 weeks ago, he could barely block her mana-soaked blows, but now he was able to use the aura himself. It was simply amazing, and now she was thrilled to know that she had made the right decision when she decided to choose him as her student. Looking around, she again saw the mysterious man in a black robe. Previously, she found him very suspicious when she saw that he had bet on Seo-jun at an underground bookmaker. The stranger himself shouted in surprise. He was excited by what had happened because he couldn't believe that someone from the 4th level could so suddenly master the aura technique. So Yoon was also surprised, but still not as surprised as this stranger. It seemed that before his eyes, Kim So-jun violated the laws of the universe. At that moment, she just remembered an important detail, that the stranger had bet a large sum on Seo-jun's victory. However, when she looked around again, the mysterious guy had disappeared from sight. The tournament ended after Seo-jun's incredible triumph, but he returned home without a victorious mood. Unfortunately, the victory over the tyrant did not bring him anything more than applause and recognition from the public. Because he did not listen to the judges, he was disqualified. Tournament officials admitted that Lee Ju-hwan had behaved in an inappropriate manner, but at that time he withdrew from the tournament and Seo-jun intervened as a participant. The judge warned him of the consequences, but he did not listen and did his own thing. Seo-jun broke the rules of the tournament and couldn't even argue with it. But the fact that no one even tried to stop his opponent before he intervened himself remained in question. Although Lee Ju-hwan withdrew from the tournament at that time, he was also punished, because enhancing a sword with an aura was regarded as attempted murder. Despite this, he will not go to trial, but the Hunters Association will definitely prohibit him from taking the exam for the next 5 years. Lee Chul-min automatically became the winner, even though he never fought in the second stage. Second place went to Lee Mingi, and third place went to Jang Dak-chul. Among the good news was that Seo-jun himself had made some pretty good progress in his lectures thanks to the last battle. According to Xiang Yu's lectures, he achieved 56% mastery of information, while Chiron's lecture was close to 49%. After thinking a little, So-jun came to the conclusion that the incomprehensible power that he felt in the battle could manifest itself precisely because progress had passed halfway. Based on the increase in his level, he decided that it was worth looking at the list of courses to choose another direction. However, at that moment, he was distracted by So-yun. She was very worried about his condition and decided to see him after the tournament ended. Fortunately, Seo-jun was completely fine, and said in his defense that although he looks like a weakling, he is actually a very tough nut to crack and doesn't mind such a battle. After making sure that everything was fine, So-yun breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, for his teacher, Seo-jun decided to apologize. When asked what he was talking about, he said with a feeling of guilt that he could have won if he had not interfered where he was not asked. Seo-jun was surprised to hear that there was actually nothing wrong with it, and she just wanted to know if he was okay. After her words that he initially counted on a cash prize, Seo-jun was speechless from the realization of the main problem of disqualification. The poor guy grabbed his head and started screaming because he really forgot that the main reason for attending this tournament was the money for a spear from the Transcendence store. He plunged into despair, and when asked what he wanted to spend the money on, he admitted that he liked one incredible spear. Despite the failure, he quickly recovered from the moral trauma and rose to his feet, saying that there was nothing wrong with it. With a kind expression on his face, he admitted that he would be lying if he said that he had no regrets. However, on the other hand, if he had not intervened, he would have regretted it much more. The moment of his sincerity and discussion of financial problems was suddenly interrupted by Lee Mingi, who already felt much better and could even return home on his own. As soon as he approached his friend, So-yun decided to lower the visor of her cap so as not to attract too much attention to herself. Holding his head, Lee Mingi shyly thanked his savior. After a short silence, he finally decided to ask whether he could become as strong as his brother if he trained hard. Seo-jun was genuinely surprised by the words of this trembling guy. Seeing his look full of hope, he couldn't upset him. To support the poor fellow, he warned him that everything is possible, but this is not an easy path. Still, he saw that Mingi clearly lacked the talent to become a hunter. However, they say that anything can be achieved if you work hard enough. However, the world is cruel, and you can't go far on dreams alone. To support him, he said that he should not focus on becoming a hunter, because he could do something else, since he was still young and had plenty of time. Lee Mingi was not at all upset by such words, and even admitted that So-jun was right about something. Perhaps he could become an excellent journalist, because he has already shown that he can accurately collect information about other people. Still, he did not want to stay long and decided to say goodbye, thanking his friend for everything he had done for him. Finally, Seo-jun asked him to never let anyone tell him what to do, even if it was his own words. He even decided to warn him that he would hear more than once that he had no talent, and that he would not cope. Therefore, he asked him not to forget that no one's opinion should become his reality, because if he really wants something, then he must achieve it, and everything else does not matter. The sincerity on the part of his brother touched Li Mingyi so much that he could not hold back his tears. Saying goodbye, he promised that someday he would visit him with his sister. Looking after Li Mingyi, So Yun said that she was pleasantly surprised by how her student acted. Seo Jun, awkwardly walking towards his house, replied that he constantly blames himself for always sticking his nose into other people's affairs. With a kind laugh, the mentor said that she saw nothing wrong with this, because now her student had his first devoted fan. In response, Seo Jun surprised her by saying that it would be better if he became her second student and not just his fan. He believed that he should have seized the moment and invited him to their academy. So Yun really didn't expect such words from him. She felt happy thanks to his support, because now he said that this was their academy. Now she was definitely not alone. Overcome with joy, Seo Yun caught up with Seo Jun again and cheerfully said that since he had done a good job, she would buy him a new spear. When asked why she suddenly decided to do this, she asked him not to worry and consider it a scholarship. Meanwhile, one of his wards came to visit the master of the Star Sword. He was warned that the master was meditating, and at this moment he could not be disturbed, but the guest said that the matter did not require delay. So Moon Chul, a one-armed guy who is considered one of the most loyal subordinates of the Star Sword, still disturbed his master. In response to his sudden intrusion, the old man said threateningly that he thought he had made himself clear when he asked not to disturb him. Releasing his incredibly powerful aura, he asked his subordinate how dare he ignore his orders. The pressure from the master was simply monstrous, and even an experienced hunter could not move. He could barely muster the strength to report that Lady So Yun had participated in the academy tournament. These words greatly interested the old man, because he could not wait for this, knowing that So Yun had no students. Moon Chul, seeing the master's uncertainty, confirmed his words. They had actually gathered some information regarding what had happened at Dream Academy recently. No one expected that after all the unsuccessful attempts, So Yun would still decide to try the old business again. Realizing the importance of the matter, the old man rose to his feet and said that he would personally deal with this problem. With a thoughtful look, Star Sword Park Min Chul said that he personally should see what his granddaughter's new student is like. The next morning, Seo Jun again went to the Dream Academy, where he wasted no time in refining his spear skills. The next daily task regarding 5,000 swings of the spear was completed, but So Yun, as usual, did not understand what was going on. The strange behavior of the student all this time put her in an awkward position, but during all this time she never managed to find out anything. Noticing her intense gaze, Seo Jun asked why she was staring at him so dissatisfied, but the girl replied that he just imagined it. In fact, she still held a grudge against him because he was so eager to get money for a new spear, but when she offered him a lucrative gift, he was so meticulous in choosing it that he ended up leaving with nothing. In response, Seo Jun said that he was simply not worthy of the gift. Pointing a condemning finger at him, the girl demonstrated that she saw right through him and said with displeasure that he was a liar, because he was clearly not one of those who would simply refuse such things. She was willing to bet that the problem was something else. She was really right, but Seo Jun didn't know how to explain to her that since he saw the beautiful weapon from the Transcendent store, he couldn't even look at an ordinary spear. Things got even worse as the price had increased to 120 million won due to a recent recalculation. Money that was not earned through honest labor was not counted. So now, So Jun was completely afraid to do anything. Seo Yun, as expected, was infuriated by the situation regarding the fact that her student refused the offer, even though she said that she would pay for everything. Naturally, when the granddaughter of the greatest hunter gives you such an offer, it's a chance of a lifetime. And yet there was one more pressing issue that they did not have time to discuss. So Yun inquired about what mana enhancement technique her student used in the battle with Zhu Huan. Seo Jun had no idea what he was talking about. So Seo Yun explained that without the technique, he would not be able to use magic. She noted that she personally saw how he pierced the armor of monsters, but judging by how he fought in the tournament, his technique was clearly not of a low class. At the same time, her interest was even stronger because she had never seen him train her. At that moment, Seo-jun thought, because he really doesn't know how this happens, because he has never studied any technique for enhancing mana. The mana enhancement technique is a technique that allows you to use your mana most effectively. There are many different types of this technique. Depending on its effectiveness, it is divided into lower and higher class equipment. Each hunter has his own mana enhancement technique. Some even patent it. In fact, Seo-jun wanted to get into the elite academy precisely in order to acquire effective high-level equipment. Therefore, he asked his mentor if she taught the technique of enhancing the mana of the Star Sword. In response, the girl sighed heavily and said that her grandfather forbade her to do this. Still, this was not surprising, because otherwise there would have been crowds of students in this academy. But as it turned out, So-yun herself came up with her own technique and was ready to teach him. She always wanted to teach, so she needed to do something like this. Seo-jun was surprised because he thought that she had no talent at all, but it turned out that she lives in the shadow of the Star Sword, and yet she pushed him to the idea that a hunter really needed mana control skills. In the fight with Ju Huan, he experienced the difference in strength between those who know how to use it and those who do not. So-yun didn't understand why he was thinking so deeply, because she was just asking whether he was interested in learning her technique or not. In fact, Seo-jun was thinking that he had a window for a new lecture. Now he could take some course on the study of mana mastery. After a few minutes, So-yun got tired of waiting for an answer from him, so she decided that he would continue to be silent, and she left with wishes of good luck in his strange training. When asked where she was going, the girl replied that she had her own business. When Seo-jun started laughing at how busy she was, Seo-yun replied that if he leaves before she returns, then he should close the door to the academy. In fact, she simply could no longer be in the same room with him. She really had nothing to do and just wanted to escape, so she was surprised that she really looked like she had nothing else to do besides the academy. As soon as she left, Seo-jun chose the mana course. Speaking about what mana is, the teacher said that it is something that is located in a world that is subject to the law of cause and effect, but is capable of destroying the laws of this universe. Of course, such words turned out to be difficult to understand, and so Jun became convinced that the Archmage Merlin was someone similar to the Buddha himself in terms of the complexity of teaching his skill. It seemed that these words were only the beginning of the lecture, but after a moment the old man said that with this, he had said everything he wanted. Seo-jun felt like he was going crazy again because of his studies. The training time was over, and the Archmage suggested taking up practice. Seo-jun received a daily task in the form of creating 1,000 mana spheres. Without wasting any time, the guy started trying to make at least one sphere. Now he could say that sensing and controlling mana was not that difficult, and it was all thanks to Kiran's lectures. However, it was still not easy, because although he felt mana, he could not give it a form. The Archmage mentioned that he should use mana to connect his mind with the outside world, transfer the fruit of his imagination into reality, deceiving and convincing it that everything happens according to the laws of nature. At one point, the student concentrated so much that he began to feel how he could give shape to his energy. In the most striking example of how to do this, the Archmage Merlin described a force that truly does not exist anywhere in nature. It was about the mana aura that Seo-jun had already used once. A few minutes later, the guy saw a small accumulation of energy in his palms, which really left his imagination and ended up in the real world. The crumb between his palms actually turned out to be a sphere of mana. He was surprised that all his efforts gave him such an insignificant result, because the Archmage was unlikely to count this as a correctly performed exercise. Despite this, he was proud of himself because this was a real achievement. He understood that over time he would do better. He just needed to constantly hone his skills. At that moment, Park Min-chul suddenly entered the academy and addressed the stranger with a dissatisfied tone. Seo-jun, holding a small sphere in his hands, was surprised by the appearance of a gentleman whom he had previously only seen on television screens. Mr. Min-chul really came to the academy to see who became his granddaughter's student. He did not expect to see something like this, because he felt that there was a clot of mana in the guy's hand. What was suspicious was that something like this was not easy to create. This meant that this guy was talented. However, this only deepened his understanding of the situation. The old man began to suspect something was wrong, thinking that there was only one reason why such a gifted guy came to So-Yun Academy. He feared that Seo-Jun was one of those who wanted to take advantage of his granddaughter. Releasing his terrifying energy, he sternly repeated his question, and, shocked by the situation, Seo-Jun was forced to dutifully introduce himself. The guy really felt afraid because he didn't expect Grandpa Starsword to visit So-Yun Academy so suddenly. Addressing him without any formality, Seo-Jun mentioned that he had only seen him online, so it was amazing to him that he was finally able to meet the greatest hunter in person. He further suggested that the distinguished guest had come to see So-Yun, after which he said that unfortunately, she had left on some business. The guy didn't understand what had happened, but the old man suddenly became furious as soon as he heard him call his dear granddaughter by name. His reaction was not strange. He treated Park So-Yun very carefully. While in Korea they only address people with whom you have a close relationship by name. But at that moment another question began to worry him. Once he released his terrifying energy, he put incredible pressure on the student, but for unknown reasons, he continued to stand on his feet. Seo-Jun didn't understand what he was talking about, so Park Min-chul said that his lust for killing, soaring in the air at that moment, usually paralyzes anyone below the S-class of hunters. After these words, the student understood what was happening, and the only explanation for why he was on his feet, he believed that this was the action of an unshakable heart. Silence began on his part, and the old man again asked a question regarding what such a guy forgot at the Park So-Yun Academy. Seo-Jun really didn't understand what he was talking about, so he looked very confused. In response, Mr. Park began to slowly walk towards him and reached for his sword, saying that with such and such talent, he would have been accepted into any academy. But for some unknown reason, he decided to get closer to So-Yun. Releasing his menacing power, the old man threatened that the guy would regret it if he decided to lie to him. Sensing danger, Seo-Jun began to panically ask him to stop and shouted that it seemed to him that they had misunderstood each other. However, Mr. Park was not going to listen to him to the end and said sternly that he did not think that he would receive an honest answer so easily. Within a moment, he swung his sword and Kim, sensing terrible danger, was forced to fall to the ground to avoid being hit. He only miraculously managed to avoid being seriously wounded, which greatly surprised the old man. As it turns out, Seo-Yun was going to visit her grandfather when she decided to leave on business. When she came to his house, she found out that he was not there. The lady who worked here said that she should ask the chairman about what Mr. Starsword is doing now. In fact, she just wanted to tell her grandfather about her new student. At the moment when she wondered where her grandfather might have gone, Seo-Jun was in a mortally dangerous situation. The old man continued to apply incredible pressure and repeatedly asked the question of what goal he was pursuing. So-Yun had no idea what was happening at that moment. However, she understood that something was wrong here. She wanted to keep everything a secret for as long as possible. But after participating in the tournament, it was no longer possible to hide Seo-Jun. That is why she decided to deal with the problem by revealing the truth to her grandfather. At that moment, the chairman approached her. The chairman was a one-armed man who was very trusted by the Star Sword. He greeted the young lady with a sincere smile, saying that he was glad to meet them. So-Yun admitted that he was just in time because she was looking for him. As soon as she told her that she had come to her grandfather, she was shocked by the truth that Mr. Park had just gone to her academy for a visit. At the same moment, she hurriedly ran back, realizing that during this time something terrible could have happened. The lady in the purple jacket didn't understand why So-Yun was so scared by this news, but the chairman already guessed what it was about. So-Yun was in a hurry like never before. She was already blaming herself for letting her guard down. Still, she knew that grandfather would come to their academy sooner or later, but she did not think that everything would be so soon. She had to hurry so that Seo-Jun and Mr. Park wouldn't meet without her. Unfortunately for her, the battle had already begun. This was the first time Seo-Jun had been in such danger, even though Master Starsword had not even drawn his sword from its sheath. However, this detail played into his hands, because now it became clear that the old man was not trying to kill him, but rather simply wanted to pacify him and get an answer to a strange question. Surprised by the young man's resilience, Park Min-chul asked who he really was. Su-jong again began to beg him to stop, saying that he really didn't understand what he was talking about. He tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding. However, the picture in the old man's head was completely different, because he could not understand how his granddaughter's student could demonstrate such incredible skills. He said that the guy was clearly hiding something, because he knows how to control mana, moves well in battle, but still continues to claim that he did not understand something. All this made him angry, because he thought that the little shit was blatantly lying to his face without even thinking. Flying to the side after another blow, Seo-jun rose to his feet and shouted that he had no idea what So-yoon told him, but in this situation he needed to calm down. In response, the old man shouted that he was a scoundrel. Seeing the raging energy of the Star Sword, Seo-jun realized that he only made the situation worse because he said something wrong. He still didn't realize that the fact was that he was calling his granddaughter by name. With a serious and threatening tone, the old man, releasing his bloodlust, said that he was originally going to discuss everything, take into account the circumstances that brought him here, but now he has no other choice. Being in this situation, Seo-jun thought that it was just a lie, and the old man was not really going to have a friendly conversation with him from the very beginning. Seo-jun decided to continue fighting, because he understood that such a great hunter would not listen to him. He was not afraid of dying, because he understood from the enemy's movements that no matter what he said, he would not kill him. If the Star Sword really wanted to kill him, it would have done it the moment Seo-jun sensed its presence. One who is above the stars themselves, Park Ming-chul's Star Sword was on a completely different level. Seo-jun didn't think that during his first meeting with the person closest to his ideals, he would have to fight. In fact, he was delighted that he had such an amazing chance to gain an incredible amount of experience in battle with the greatest hunter. Of course, Mr. Park was not particularly happy with this behavior on the part of the young man. He considered him a real scoundrel. Seo-jun's attitude has changed. He even enhanced his own body with an aura, showing that he does not deny the fact that he is ready to fight. During his life, Mr. Park saw many hunters, but only one looked into his eyes without fear. Seo-jun looked exactly the same, so you'd think he was strong enough to really try his luck. Rushing into the attack, the old man struck the first blow with thoughts about what this young man needed from his granddaughter. Seo-jun could hardly resist such pressure. He still couldn't cope with his opponent's speed and couldn't even feel his attacks. His face was covered with cold sweat from every movement of the great hunter. He couldn't even notice the simple blows performed by the Star Sword. The old man's power was beyond his understanding. However, Seo-jun continued to try to hold out and dodge the attacks in every possible way with incredible interest in how much longer he could hold out against such a monster. At one point, he himself rushed to attack. However, Star Sword did not feel any danger from him. He was surprised by the young man's self-confidence and decided to teach him a lesson, hitting him in the stomach with incredible speed with the hilt of his sword. Seo-jun flew to the side with a scream, and Mr. Park looked away and said that his pathetic attacks were ridiculous banality. Despite the hopelessness, Seo-jun did not give up and tried to gain as much knowledge as possible from this fight. He could not allow the battle to end quickly, and tried to find out at least something else. Rising to his feet, he realized that tricks would not help him. However, while the enemy was not yet serious, he felt that he still had a chance to surprise the old man. Park Ming-chul did not want to waste much time on this issue, so he rushed to the attack again. Seo-jun felt like he needed to impress him, but he didn't know how to do it. However, as soon as he stopped thinking about it, he trusted his feelings and surprisingly managed to evade his opponent's sword. He then desperately swung his spear to strike at close range. Subduing the mana to his will, he forced it to fill the spear, strengthening the counterattack. The old man was unexpectedly surprised at what the young man was capable of, who didn't even have a hunter's license. He couldn't figure out what kind of mana technique he was using, but it looked extremely interesting. Seo-jun directed his punch with a furious cry, putting all his strength into this attack. A powerful surge of energy directed at the old man limited visibility at that moment. However, the result was a foregone conclusion. He did not even manage to catch a powerful enemy. After Seo-jun used his aura, Mr. Park shouted that the young man had finally shown his true mean face. In response, Seo-jun said displeasedly that Mr. Star Sword was the first to attack him. After these words, Seo-jun, who did not understand the old man's feelings, again said that he could not wait for his teacher to return. calling the granddaughter of the Star Sword by name. The greatest hunter began to lose control, demonstrating his terrifying strength. He said that if the young man wanted it so badly, then he would personally send him to the next world. Just as Kim was beginning to say goodbye to life, fortunately for him, So-Yoon burst inside the training room and shouted that it was enough. The fighting stopped, and So-Yoon started screaming that she wanted to know what was going on here. She was incredibly angry at her grandfather for starting to scare the crap out of her students again. Looking at Seo-Jun, she began to get angry at her grandfather and accuse him of beating the poor fellow until he had bruises all over his body. Kim tried to smooth the situation over, saying that he had no serious injuries, although he was already in pain. Turning his gaze away, the old man said that such a mattress should not dare call himself a man. In response, Seo-Jun allowed himself the impudence of telling the Star Sword that it doesn't matter whether you are a man or a woman, anyone would be hurt if they were beaten by a great hunter. As soon as he said that he wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Park didn't care who he beat, the old man immediately jumped out of his seat and shouted that the young man would soon regret his words. Seo-Jun, taking advantage of the situation, cleverly hid behind the granddaughter of the Star Sword, asking if he would continue to beat him. So-Yoon didn't understand what was happening at all. She had never before seen simpletons who would allow themselves to talk to her grandfather like that. Continuing to communicate with the great hunter as if they were some kind of relatives, the dissatisfied Seo-Jun asked if it was possible to find out why the Star Sword met him in such an unfriendly way. So-Yoon understood that sooner or later her grandfather would run out of patience, so she asked everyone to keep quiet. Then she awkwardly apologized to her only student for what happened, but So-Jun did not hold a grudge against her and said that she was not to blame for anything, and he himself escaped with only bruises. Despite his words, Miss Park again respectfully apologized, saying that she was very sorry, but she could explain the situation a little later. Now Seo-Jun began to understand what was going on. Seo-Yoon really needed a frank conversation with her grandfather, who, apparently, treated her very carefully and controlled her in everything she did. At such a moment, it was necessary to leave them alone, so the guy said that it wouldn't hurt him to drop by the emergency room. After these words, he left the academy building, and So-Yoon peered after him, smilingly thinking that she was lucky that he treated this with understanding. After that, she looked towards her grandfather with a stern look. They had to have a very serious dialogue about what had happened. Although she had decided in advance that she would tell him everything, at the moment when she had to speak, it was difficult for her to even utter a word. Grandpa himself started the conversation by saying that Seo-Jun seemed suspicious, so she should stay away from him. So-Yoon began to get nervous and answered hesitantly that he was not suspicious at all. She asked how he even knew what Seo-Jun really was like. All her life, her grandfather completely ignored her opinion. The academy turned out to be a compromise among all her decisions, but even her grandfather constantly interfered with her activities. He gave every new student a dressing down, and so they all left, unable to withstand such pressure. Still, she understood why grandfather behaved this way. Previously, students actually came to her academy because of her big name, so she couldn't stop them when they wanted to leave after learning that grandpa didn't teach here. Not wanting to discuss this, Park Min-chul said that So-Yoon should throw this guy out of her academy. He didn't even expect that So-Yoon would dare to contradict his words. Refusing his instructions, she said that Seo-Jun is not at all the way he sees him. When her grandfather asked her to repeat these words in a stern tone, So-Yoon shouted that she would not do this, and that she should not always listen to him. Not wanting to put up with her grandfather's next intervention, she shouted to remind him that this was her academy, and only she could decide what to do with her students. She had almost nothing to remember during the time she communicated with her student, but when she looks at him, she feels something strange. She wants to be with him as long as possible, because in these moments she feels happy. Now she wanted to take matters into her own hands. So-Yoon showed her character for the first time, although it was more like a desperate cry from the soul. Turning around, she apologized in a quiet tone for allowing herself to shout at her grandfather, and yet she again said that this time she would do as she decided. It was really the first time Mr. Park had seen her so emotional. A few years later, a tragedy occurred that shook his life and turned it upside down. That day, he heard about an incident with the appearance of a monster on the streets of Seoul, but was busy with his own affairs, leaving it to the young hunters. However, At one point, he was interrupted by the chairman with the terrifying news that his only son had died in that incident. When he lost his son and looked at So-yoon, who had no one left, he decided that he had to teach her how to stand up for herself. The little girl's life had changed greatly, and she could no longer enjoy the things that children her age usually enjoyed. The old man could not do otherwise, because he had to protect her. That's why he was so strict with her. She didn't like swordsmanship, but he was persistent in her training and didn't let her give up, telling her that if she continued like this, she would never become a hunter, let alone reach A-class proficiency. As she grew older, she began to express that she did not like being a hunter. She talked about how she wanted to become a teacher, but her grandfather refused to accept her wishes, saying that that was not what he taught her for. He was afraid of her own decisions and desires, so he constantly shouted that she should just do what he told her. Park Min-chul understood perfectly well that all this time he had been oppressing his granddaughter, even though he had the awareness that sooner or later she would turn against him. Actually, this is what happened, because he once agreed to a compromise when he gave her a little freedom, allowing her to found her own academy. Sighing heavily, he accepted this situation, realizing that he could not take away the only thing that brought her joy. As expected, So-yoon reached her breaking point and still rebelled. Meanwhile, Seo-jun has already completed his examination and treatment at the emergency room. Now he felt like new and naively thought that another conversation with the Star Sword would no longer be a problem. Recalling their meeting with a smile, he noted that at that moment he thought that he was no longer a tenant. He understood perfectly well that he escaped with only minor bruises, only because the old man held back. However, if So-yoon had been late, then everything could have ended much worse. Now he understood how difficult it was for So-yoon to be under his strict supervision all the time. That evening, So-yoon called him and told him everything. She spoke about her difficult relationship with her grandfather and about what happened to past students. Despite such revelations, Seo-jun was still sure that she kept silent about a lot. But this was enough to understand how she felt and why the Star Sword treated him this way. Returning to the academy, he could not forget that situation, thinking that even though he understood the old man's motives, it was still wrong because even such experiences are not a reason for beating. As he walked back to the training room, he doubted he would hear an apology. On the other hand, he still learned a valuable lesson because he made little progress not only in his skills, but also in mastering the lectures. Joyfully opening the doors, he suddenly heard a low male voice. He couldn't believe that this time he would be greeted by the Lord of the Star Sword again. Park Min-chul sat calmly on the floor and, seeing the young man's indecisiveness, asked him not to stand at the door. The guy began to feel trembling, realizing that the old man probably wanted to beat him again, but the Star Sword made an offer to sit next to him. During a calm conversation, Mr. Park learned that So-yoon and her strange student had entered into some kind of mutually beneficial agreement. Yet he was still suspicious and with a stern look asked if Seo-jun was hiding something else. Kim was as impatient as the Star Sword himself, so he nervously replied that he had expressed everything and had nothing to hide. Taking a closer look at the calm flow of the young man's magic, the old man admitted that he was not lying. However, the question of where he got such talent and so much strength still remained a mystery to him. In his entire career, Park Min-chul had never seen so much power in an ordinary academy student. Even more questions were raised by the moment when they first met, and so June, seeing his anger, not only wasn't afraid, but was even somehow inspired and didn't back down. When Seo-jun said that he wanted to go away to start his training, the old man decided that this would be a great time to find out more about him. He wanted to see how this scoundrel trained to see what he might be hiding. However, after several hours of careful observation, he was sure of only one thing. This young man was clearly not himself. He couldn't believe that what Seo-jun called training was continuously staring at his phone, which was turned off with a blank screen. At the same time, Seo-jun was very emotional and even sometimes screamed strange things. Distracting the young man from the strange method of teaching, the old man suggested that he was meditating this way. Seo-jun didn't know how to explain his training, so he decided to just agree. In response, the experienced hunter agreed that meditation is an excellent workout, but noted that you shouldn't overdo it either. He wanted Seo-jun to understand that meditation strengthens the mind and spirit, but not the body. Seo-jun simply agreed with him and continued to look at the phone, so Mr. Park was surprised that he was not at all interested in his words. The old man decided to play trump cards and said that if the young man wanted, then he could teach him something. Seo-jun pleased his pride because he was really distracted with surprise that the Star Sword himself decided to take care of him. The old man did not expect a different reaction, yet the young man hurt his pride, so he blurted it out. To keep things simple, he didn't mind showing him a couple of his moves. However, his pride was trampled a moment later, because the ridiculous boy refused, saying that he was happy with everything anyway. Moreover, he asked if he could be left alone during training, because they could talk a little later. The moment of trampled pride of the great hunter could have ended in tears, but So-yun visited the training hall on time. She was shocked when she saw her grandfather next to the student whom he had recently nearly beaten to death. The old man was glad to see her and immediately headed towards her, saying that he needed to discuss something. So-yun was afraid that he was up to something, so she warned him that she would not forgive him if he even laid a finger on her student. However, as it turned out, he just wanted to speak out about Seo-jun's shocking behavior, saying that he was not right in the head. They could not understand that there was anyone in the world who could refuse training from the Star Sword itself. Instead of getting a few lessons from the greatest hunter, Seo-jun actually continued to act like he had a headache. The guy stared at his switched-off phone, which looked very crazy. So-yun understood her grandfather's feelings, but she had already come to terms with such oddities of the student, and therefore said that this was still normal behavior on his part. Still, she agreed with all his words, saying that she also thought exactly the same way before. After that, she turned to her student, saying that she was already free. Seo-jun immediately looked away from the lecture and looked at her with a smile, and began answering questions regarding his well-being. Yet the old man was still suspicious, since he could not find answers to all his questions. From his observations, he could definitely say that Kim So-jun is not particularly smart, but even despite this, So-yun always smiles when she looks at him. He found it hard to believe that she actually enjoyed talking to him. It made him remember that he had never actually seen her smile like that before. In conversations with her grandfather, she is always strict or sad. He often saw her offended, but not so sincerely happy. Realizing that this could be their sympathy for each other, the old man began to get angry again, worried about his granddaughter, thinking that So-jun dared to hit on her. As soon as he took the first step to teach the impudent man another lesson, he was interrupted by the chairman, who hastily burst into the training room. He immediately apologized for distracting them, but said that the matter was urgent. As it turned out, the Order of Truth invited Mr. Park to visit them. Star Sword was surprised that those wonderful guys even wanted from him. In response, he said that if they want something from him, then they should come themselves, because he doesn't mind. However, this time the matter was very serious, because as it turned out, Sir Kalia himself wanted to see the master of the Star Sword. Even more shocking was the addition that the Order of Truth had another request. Everyone was literally speechless when they heard that Kalia wanted Mr. Park to bring a man named Kim Seo-jun with him. Hearing his name, Seo-jun was surprised that anyone actually knew about his existence. The old man immediately thought that the strange guy was somehow connected with the cunning Order of Truth, so he assumed that he was Sir Kalia's faithful dog. Even So-yun believed this assumption, so Seo-jun answered impudently and dissatisfiedly that he himself was interested in how they knew his name. Everything fell into place when Mrs. Park remembered that there was a strange man in a black robe at the academy tournament. She assumed that the stranger hiding his identity was somehow connected with the Order of Truth. But even after these words, the old man thought that it was still somehow strange because Kalia was unlikely to be interested in any ordinary person. Turning to So-jun, So-yun asked if he happened to know this person, but her student answered with tension that he didn't remember anything like that. After that, he completely put the guys in an awkward position when he confusedly asked if he could refuse this request. All his life he was far from such things, because he devoted himself to working at the Enterprise. So-yun said that the Order of Truth is an organization that includes 7 apostles who are on a par with the heads of major states, so it is unreasonable to refuse their request. Sir Kalia is the successor of the Apostle of Chastity, and usually people like him do not schedule personal meetings. Even after hearing this, Seo-jun did not cease to amaze and said that he had nothing to do with this, because for him it was just some unfamiliar foreigner. He was more interested in continuing to train. In response to these words, Mr. Park's chairman said that he now fully understood why everyone thought so highly of Sir Kalia. When Starsword asked to clarify what he was talking about, Seo Moon Chol replied that Sir Kalia knew in advance that Kim So-jun would refuse his offer. The young academy student froze in place when he heard that the foreigner asked to convey, in such a case, that if Seo-jun agreed to come, then he would give him 100 million won. The mere mention of such a large sum caused neural activation in the monkey's brain, and Seo-jun immediately smiled reflexively, agreeing to the offer. Moreover, he wondered how the stranger knew that he needed exactly that amount. The Order of Truth is a religious organization, but it does not serve human gods, because their god is truth. That mysterious man in a robe is the Great Voice, and the organization is headed by 7 apostles. They convey the will of God, that is, the truths of humility, diligence, gratitude, mercy, patience. A century ago, the Order of Truth was considered a simple cult, one among many. But when the cataclysm happened, they joined forces with the forces of the heroes. Largely thanks to them, peace reigned on Earth again, and so the number of followers of the Order increased significantly. But more importantly, the berserker giant monster was destroyed thanks to their power. When everyone thought that the trouble was over, Berserker suddenly appeared. He was so strong that even all the heroes combined could not cope with him. The situation was so desperate that it was called the Second Cataclysm. Only the Great Voice and the 7 apostles were able to cope with it, thanks to which the Earth was saved. These days, one of them made a surprise visit to Seoul and settled into a hotel on the outskirts of the city. The place seemed too nondescript for a representative of a world religion. When Mr. Park and Seo-jun arrived at the place, the old man told the cult member that he had come personally to Kalia, after which he began to introduce the guy next to him, calling him a fraud. In response, the man in the robe, without listening to the end, looked at the young man with interest, and with anticipation of something interesting, said that he knew very well that in front of him was Kim So-jun. Without delaying the guests, he invited them to pass and informed them that Sir Kalia was already waiting for them. Following the man in the robe, Seo-jun thought that if Mrs. Park was right, then someone from the Order really was at the tournament, and perhaps they decided to lure him with the same amount that he could get for winning. It still remained unclear why he was watching him and why he called him. The guys approached the meeting room, and Kim came to the conclusion that Sir Kalia might know something about him or about the Academy of Transcendence. In addition to the money for the meeting, he planned to find out why he attracted their attention. One of the followers of the Order of Truth led them to a beautiful waiting room, where he asked them to wait a little while for Sir Kalia to come to them. As soon as they sat down, the old man sighed displeasedly, saying that he knew that Kalia would not sit and wait for them. In response, Kim asked if he personally knew Sir Kalia. The old man surprised him with his answer, because as it turned out, this was their first meeting. Seo-jun previously thought that she was quite close. As it turned out, Kalia called him a couple of times, but they never met in person. Even during the cataclysm, he met his mentor, the Apostle of Chastity, but he had not yet met the successor himself. These words reminded the young man that Mr. Park was one of the heroes who once saved the world. For him all this time, he was more like So-yun's grandfather, but he once again thought that he was still a star sword, and this should not be forgotten. When it came to the cataclysm, So-jun decided to inquire about the Great Voice. He shared that he had previously heard that he only appeared in public once, during a fight with a berserker. The curious guy asked the old man whether he had personally met such a great man, and Mr. Park wondered what the Great Voice was like. He succinctly replied that there was no such thing. With some thoughtfulness, he nevertheless clarified that once he managed to see him from afar. At that moment, they heard the door open, and Sir Kalia himself walked inside. When he mentioned that he was glad for their first meeting, Mr. Park replied with a stern look that Kalia himself called them here, and ended up making them wait. Kalia, the successor of the Apostle of Chastity, who looked more like a pretty girl, finally appeared in front of them. He justified his delay by saying that he needed time to purify his body and mind before preaching the word of truth. Sighing heavily, Mr. Pak said that he had never heard such heresy before, while Kalia himself approached the interesting young man, apologizing for being late in making his acquaintance. He introduced himself properly, and when the young man was about to answer, he interrupted him with words that he already knew about him. Kalia specifically thanked him for agreeing to their meeting, even though it was extremely unexpected and incomprehensible for a newcomer among hunters. When asked how the apostle's successor knew about him, Kalia replied that they needed to clear up some misunderstandings in advance. He said that when Sojun participated in academic competitions, he was then watched by one of their believers. He praised the promising hunter so much that he himself wanted to personally find out how strong and amazing he was. In response, Seo-jun asked shrilly and incredulously if this was really the whole reason why such a great and busy man decided to take the time to make such an acquaintance. He supposed it was unlikely that he would want to see him for that simple reason. In response, Kalia said with a restrained smile that he just wanted to talk about this, but first, he should ask permission to sit down with them. As it turned out, we were talking about dungeon exploration. That is why the busy heir of one of the apostles decided to gather them for a conversation. He sincerely hoped to cooperate with Mr. Starsword in dungeon exploration. The old man, dissatisfied and impatiently, asked why he should do this. In response, Kalia said with restraint that he knew better than anyone that this was far from the end. These words sounded mysterious, and Mr. Park asked what they were talking about. Kalia reported that he had a report of corruption in one of the dungeons in Korea. He decided to meet with the Star Sword, believing that he was the best person to know about that incident. The old man did not want to talk about this, because he believed that this was a common coincidence, but the heir of the apostles said that this was the decision of the Order of Truth, so they must definitely check the condition of that dungeon. Now Mr. Park could confidently assume that this was why Kalia flew to Korea. A piercing observation was also the words that in this way the young master of the Order of Truth would be able to consolidate his position. With a sincere laugh, Kalia admitted that he could not be fooled and was truly shrill, as always. In response, Minchul said that it was arrogant of them to declare that this was the decision of the Order of Truth, and not his own personal interest. Kalia understood that Mr. Starsword was not particularly interested in doing him a favor, so he decided to touch his personal life, and said that he knew that he was unlikely to be missing anything, but he might be interested in their help for his granddaughter in the development of the Hunter Academy. As soon as Mr. Park Min-chul heard the mention of his beloved granddaughter, whom he was trying to protect from too much attention and danger, he immediately showed his determination and unleashed his true form of terrifying bloodlust, which left Seo-jun's body numb. With a stern look, he said threateningly that if Kalia ever tries to involve So-yun in something like this again, then he will not leave him alive. Kalia didn't even flinch from such a powerful force, but he admitted his mistake and calmly apologized for mentioning Miss Park. In his defense, he said that apart from this, he had nothing that he could offer to the Star Sword. Having no other choice, he offered to fulfill one of his requests, just as he would help him with this matter. In response, the old man said that this was simply ridiculous, because Kalia could say tomorrow that there was no deal. He had no reason to trust the influential heir of the apostle. Kalia understood his words and said that if the Star Sword wishes, he can swear an oath to him in the name of the Order of Truth. This was more than enough, but Mr. Pak did not understand whether this would be enough for Kalia to determine the place of the apostle. But for Kalia this was not particularly important, because in this way he could not claim that there was no deal between them. When it came to the right of oath in the name of truth, Mr. Park could not refuse to help him. Once they completed their deal, Sir Kalia decided to move on to talk with the academy student. With a pleased look, he said that he would speak directly. They in the Order of Truth suddenly wanted to sponsor his future path as a hunter, seeing incredible potential in him. It was about sponsoring various activities that the academy would not be able to take care of. Seo-jun remained cool and asked what he would do if he received their sponsorship. Kalia replied that they did not require anything in return, because it would be enough for them that Mr. Kim and the Order of Truth were close and could contact each other. It all seemed strange, and so Jun understood that they would still want to receive payment for their services. In response, he decided to satisfy his own interest and said that if Sir Kalia answered one question honestly, then he would think about their proposal. Of course, Seo-jun wanted to inquire about the Transcendence Academy, but he knew that it would be suspicious if he asked about it directly. He could not be sure that Sir Kalia would answer his question honestly, and if he turned away or avoided answering altogether, then he would no longer be able to find out the details of the interest in his person on the part of the Order of Truth. In this case, he decided that there was only one way to check whether Sir Kalia knew something about the Academy, thanks to which he acquired incredible power. With a sudden and not entirely formal movement, he took out a mobile phone from his pocket and held the screen towards Sir Kalia's face. After that, he asked the heir of the Apostle what he saw on the screen of this smartphone. This question was very sudden. Sir Kalia looked intently at the screen. At that moment, Seo-jun turned on the Buddha's lecture on what the soul, death, and reincarnation are. However, Sir Kalia calmly replied that the question seemed very strange to him, and it was difficult for him. Taking the phone away from the face of the heir of the Apostle, Seo-jun said that in this case, he could not do anything with his decision if Sir Kalia did not want to answer. A moment later, the heir of the Apostle laconically replied that he saw only a black screen. When asked if he was satisfied with this answer, Seo-jun said that this was enough. After this, he finally made a final decision regarding the sponsorship offer and announced that he was refusing. This conversation haunted the heir of the Apostle even after they said goodbye. His ward named Kalkos was the one who carried out some important assignments. He was also the person who noticed Kim Seo-jun. This time he had to find out about the distortions, but he was unable to find anything. When Sir Kalia asked if he was sure in a threatening tone, Kalkos swore in the name of the Order of Truth that he was completely sure of his observations. As for Kim Seo-jun, Kalia concluded that there was nothing special about him. He believed that even if he were special, he was now just an ordinary student. The question of what he saw on his smartphone screen took him by surprise, but all he really saw was a dark screen. But in fact, for a long time he was haunted by the nagging feeling that remained in his chest. Then Kalkos said that he was forced to report to another apostle. In response, Kalia said that now it is worth observing, because the priority is the distortion in the dungeon and the situation around other heroes. Besides the Soul Blade and the Sword of Darkness, he called everyone. As for these two, no one saw them, so communication was never established. While returning home, Seo-jun kept thinking about whether Kalia really opened anything from him. He was distracted by Mr. Pak's question regarding why he refused Kalia's offer. The guy replied that it seemed too suspicious to him. He did not know what the Order of Truth actually was, but he was still sure that Kalia was clearly not associated with the Academy of Transcendence. He did not want to enter into an almost free deal with suspicious individuals. When asked if he was embarrassed by the studentless academy he belongs to, Seo-jun replied that he had never met a more honest person than Miss So-yun. Taking advantage of the moment, he decided to ask Mr. Starsword what the concept of dungeon distortion meant. Park Ming-chul seriously replied that this means that the magic inside is distorted. The magic wave inside the dungeon is distorted, so its difficulty is different from the value measured when the dungeon was formed. Such distortions have many side effects, but mainly, they are a sudden increase in difficulty and breaking the dungeon earlier than expected. Seo-jun had never heard of this before, so the Star Sword explained that in fact, they had observed this paranormal phenomenon many years ago, and now you really don't see such a thing. The words that such a phenomenon usually occurs during a cataclysm interested Seo-jun very much. At that moment, he said that in this case, Kalia meant that this could mean that the previous incident had not ended, but had only been weakened. In response, the old man asked him not to worry, saying that the heir must have made a mistake, because the cataclysm had already ended a long time ago. They were heading to So-yun's academy, but the old man suddenly turned around and left, saying that Seo-jun had no need to know about his affairs. Finally, he sternly warned that if the young man tries to do some strange things with So-yun, then he will not live. In response, the insolent boy said that this meant that the Star Sword recognized him, but the old man displeasedly explained that he meant that he continued to follow him. With an absurd laugh, Seo-jun again crossed the line of what was permitted, and asking the old man to be honest, suggested that it was precisely because of this that So-yun was moving away from him. Seeing the anger and bloodlust on the part of the great hunter, the ridiculous guy said that he did not want to be beaten again, after which he hastily left, heading towards the Dream Academy. Returning to the academy, Seo-jun came to the conclusion that it would not hurt him to become stronger as quickly as possible, so as not to be afraid that one day the Star Sword would decide to beat him to death. When he walked inside, Seo-jun wondered why he was alone. The student explained that she and her grandfather were heading to the academy, but he suddenly changed his mind and went in the opposite direction. When asked by the worried Seo-jun about what was being discussed, he replied that nothing terrible had happened, and she needn't worry. Fearing that another unpleasant dialogue could occur between them, Seo-jun said that Grandpa has a bad character, for which she sincerely apologizes, because she should have said this earlier. In response, Seo-jun said with a kind smile that the way the Star Sword expresses itself is, of course, wrong, but there is nothing wrong with it. With an awkward laugh, he said that the old man could change even now. Still, he admitted that he would still take a few hard hits if he did something terrible. After these words, he began to apologize for speaking some kind of nonsense, but at that moment a blush appeared on Seo-jun's face and a sparkle in his eyes. After a little awkwardness due to genuine emotions, she decided to change the subject and reminded him that he needed money and was trying in every possible way to earn as much as possible. He could not deny this, because all the 100 million received from Kalia went to pay off debts. While Seo-jun was immersed in his problems and financial shortcomings, Seo-jun took up the task of rectifying the situation and, looking at the phone, said that while he was away, she found a task that was ideal for him. As it turned out, she was very interested in dungeon clearing competitions. When Seo-jun saw that the first-place prize was a whopping 300 million won, he screamed with joy, making Seo-jun happy with his reaction. The girl clarified that this competition is like a kind of dungeon raiding competition that no one can handle. As it turned out, these were the dungeons that hunters didn't really want to go through due to their low profitability. Seo-jun remembered that it was true that while those awakened during the cataclysm had a sense of responsibility, now hunters only strive for profit. In turn, Seo-jun clarified that unprofitable and abandoned dungeons are mostly low-rated and more difficult to attack. However, if the dungeons are not cleared quickly, then after a while they explode, releasing monsters, so no matter how low-ranking the monsters are, they still pose a threat to society. At first, such dungeons were monitored by government hunters, but it was ineffective to send them to such a seedy place. And in the end, the state solved this problem in a different way. That is why the so-called dungeon clearing competitions were created. The dungeons are just the right level for even the average student to tackle. The strength of the students now is more than enough to deal with them, and they also said that the results will be reflected in the ranking of the hunter academies. Upon learning of this, Seo-jun admitted that only a real genius could have come up with this. Seo-jun was sure that he could handle it, so she asked what his answer would be. The prize of 300 million and the opportunity to increase the progress of lectures as the raid progressed did not give him a reason to refuse. With cheerful smiles, they agreed to participate, and Seo-jun said that she would then submit an application in the near future. Seo-jun had no idea how much she worked to satisfy his needs. He assumed that most likely she was looking for information on how to raise the academy's rating and came across something similar. As for the competition, he already guessed that, taking into account the experience of the last game, it would not be easy. However, this time he promised himself that he would not make mistakes and would definitely get his money. After that, he decided to clarify exactly how the competition was held. As it turns out, it lasts 1 week, and when it starts, a list of dungeons will be sent to participants from the government. Participants can then check the list and book the dungeon they want to clear through the app. To prevent monopoly, dungeons are given 10 hours to complete, and you can only book one at a time. In extreme cases, the reservation will be automatically canceled. In this case, speed is life, so the one who clears the most dungeons the fastest will win. In response, Seo-jun suddenly said that it was difficult. As it turned out, he meant that after the raid it was necessary to get rid of the corpses. Seo-jun grabbed her head and said that there is no need to do this, because they won't give a lot of money for it. She was shocked when she realized that he wanted to do this again. The winnings were unimaginably larger and more important, but Seo-jun stood his ground, saying that if you collect all the corpses, you will get a very impressive amount. That's why he said it would be difficult. Seo-jun continued to shake her head to the sides, demonstrating that she did not agree to such madness. Lost in thought, he remembered that he had previously pondered tactics for quickly clearing dungeons. After that, he immediately energetically reached for the phone. He wanted to clarify the competition rules to see if the trick he had in mind could be used. A few days later, competition day began. Seo Jun had downloaded the dungeon tracking app in advance, so it seemed like they were ready. However, they were actually waiting for one more person whom Seo Jun had called as his assistant. Seo Jun happily said that the person in question would soon find them, because if finding the road were an ability, then even the Star Sword would not be able to compare with him. Within a moment, Mr. Ajusi came to them. With a kind laugh, Seo Jun said that this time there would be no penalty for being late. Ajusi Minchul was the assistant that Seo Jun decided to take with him on raids. A few days ago, he suddenly pulled him away from work with an offer to work in the same team. He invited him to carry the corpses of monsters left after the competition and also to be his driver. The guy promised that he would pay him well, because no one else could do such delicate work, in which every second was important. The job of cutting up monsters requires quite a bit of skill, and when it came to his uncle's skills, Seo Jun could vouch for him. A few minutes after the meeting, they received a message that the dungeon clearing competition had begun. Mr. Ajushi and Seo Jun began the task and quickly got into the truck they were going to use to transport the monsters from the dungeons.